Some schools give you a wand and a timetable. This one gives you a lantern and a warning. You're 11 years old, standing at the edge of a forest that even the ghosts refuse to haunt. The trees are warped, the paths move, and something in there is very interested in your heartbeat. The exam, your first night? Go in before moonrise, come back before dawn, that's it. No teachers, no safety net, no Madame Pomfrey with a stack of skilagro. Just you, whatever lives in the dark, and the quiet understanding that not everyone returns. And the wild part? This isn't some illegal cult in the back of Nocturne Alley. This is one of the 11 officially recognized wizarding schools of the world. Stamped. Approved. Proud little line in an International Confederation report. Hogwarts hosts a murder maze tournament once every few centuries and everyone loses their minds. These people are basically running the Tri-Wizard maze as a yearly icebreaker. If you're wondering what kind of ministry signs off on that, the answer is the kind that cares a lot more about politics than children. Recognition doesn't mean safe. It means useful. It means this school trains the right bloodlines, guards the right borders, produces the right kind of witches and wizards the big governments want in their pocket. Survival rates are just an unfortunate statistic on page 12. Let's start with the big lie the wizarding world tells you after Deathly Hallows. Harry wins, Voldemort faceplants into oblivion, Kingsley cleans house, Hermione eventually runs the ministry, and you think, cool, the adults finally fixed it. But while we were all crying over Snape's portrait and arguing about baby names, the real battlefield quietly shifted. It moved into classrooms, into 11 ancient institutions that apparently get to decide who counts as properly educated in magic. Officially, there are only 11 major schools: Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, Durmstrang, Ilvermorny, Castelobruxo, Mahoutokoro, Uagadou, Koldovstoretz, plus a couple in the Far East and Africa that the books name drop like mysterious DLC. Unofficially, that number is dripping with blood purity politics, colonialism, and a century of people in fancy robes pretending smaller local traditions don't exist because they can't control them. Look, nobody was surprised that Durmstrang ended up with the "we're not saying dark arts, but also we are" reputation. But what happens when you realize there's a school literally built on stolen magic from conquered communities? Or a school where your robes change color to out you as a dark wizard in front of your classmates? Yeah. Take a moment. Because after Voldemort, every one of these places had a choice. Clean up their history or double down. Some tightened security, some buried scandals so deep even the ghosts forgot. Some quietly turned initiation rites and house rivalries into plausible deniability for training the next generation of extremists. In this deep dive, we're going on a world tour. We're talking Hogwarts' cursed positions and war trauma, Beauxbatons' pretty facade over ugly politics, Durmstrang's selective memory, Ilvermorny's colonial baggage, Castelobruxo's endangered rainforest magic, Mahoutokoro's snitch robes, Uagadou's skywriting prodigies, Koldovstoretz feral sports, and the shadow schools the Confederation barely admits exist. And by the end, you might agree, Hogwarts is the safe option. We'll get to who survives that forest in a bit. First, we need to talk about how these 11 schools ended up running the post-war wizarding world in the first place. So how do you end up with a whole planet? Thousands of witches and wizards, and only 11 schools that count? That's not world building. That's a power move. Let's start with the canon. The International Confederation of Wizards, this UN but make it wands organization, officially recognizes 11 large, long-established schools worldwide. That phrase is doing Olympic-level gymnastics. Large and long-established apparently means we like you, you've been around forever, and you don't embarrass us in front of the muggles. If you're wondering who decides which castle gets a stamp of approval and which one gets treated like a sketchy night class in someone's basement, it's the ICW, the same crowd that gave us the International Statute of Secrecy and then pretended global magical inequality was just a quirky cultural difference. Recognition isn't about education, it's about alignment. To get on that list, a school has to play nice with ICW norms. Strict secrecy laws, no public wand waving, and a curriculum that doesn't openly challenge the blood status quo. Durmstrang can flirt with dark arts all day, but notice how it still fits the mold. Elite, remote, aggressively selective about who gets in. We don't hate Muggleborns, we just misplace their applications. Look, nobody was surprised. And that European center of gravity? Yeah. Take a moment. Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, Durmstrang. Three of the big prestige names all clustered around Western magical culture, which, if you've been paying attention, already controls most of the international laws, trade, and respectable magical research. Uagadou, Castelobruxo, Mahoutokoro, and the others get a seat at the table, sure. But the table was built in Europe, by Europeans, for European problems. So what happens when you announce there are exactly 11 real schools? You create a shadow layer by accident, or more likely, on purpose. Family academies in old pureblood estates where kids learn curses, granddad swears are just defensive. Underground community schools in townships and favelas teaching wandless magic because wands are too expensive or outright banned. Extremist training camps where disillusioned witches and wizards go when Durmstrang feels too mainstream. All the people who can't afford a castle education, can't get a letter, or don't trust an institution tied to the same governments that hunted their grandparents. They don't stop learning magic. They just stop doing it where the ICW can see. This is where it gets dark. Calling only 11 schools recognized is basically slapping a ministry seal on colonialism and classism. European-style wand work, Latin incantations, and castle boarding schools are real magic. Indigenous rituals, community healers, ancestral spirit work? That's local color, at best. Criminal at worst. Entire cultures get downgraded to folklore while Hogwarts kids are literally blowing up cauldrons in a government-approved death castle. And here's the twist. Some of those shiny 11 are built right on top of the magic they pushed aside. Ilvermorny's cozy North American vibes? Yeah, we'll get to that later. Several African institutions that didn't make the brochure? They're the reason Uagadou looks so polished today. When you start digging into how these schools were founded, who got written out, and which spells were quietly rebranded as new discoveries, the hypocrisy stops being subtle. Because if the official schools are this messy, wait until you see what the unrecognized ones are willing to do. So once you know the only 11 schools thing is political, you start to see the next layer of nonsense. The ranking system nobody admits exists, but everybody plays along with anyway. Let's start with the so-called top tier. Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, Durmstrang, the old money European trio. These are the schools that act like they invented magic, language, and table manners, while quietly pretending their murder forests and cursed lakes are just ambiance. They get framed as the default, the gold standard, the places you name drop at ICW cocktail parties when you want other diplomats to nod like, ah yes, very respectable, very not evil at all. Then you've got Ilvermorny, the flashy upstart. The school that showed up late to the party, wearing brand new robes and a story about being built on a mountain full of wholesome, freedom-loving magic. If you're wondering why it rockets straight into the same prestige bracket as places 1,000 years older, it's because the American wizarding establishment throws money, exchange programs, and propaganda at it until everyone just agrees it's elite. Old money Europe plus New World PR machine? That's the top shelf. Everybody else gets quietly filed under regional. Castelobruxo? Oh, that's the rainforest one with the cool creatures. Uagadou. That's the cloud school with the wandless kids. Very impressive, very exotic. Please stay in your brochure box. Mahoutokoro, Koldovstoretz, the unnamed Far Eastern and African institutions that actually predate some European schools. They get talked about like electives, side quests, not the main campaign. And this is where the propaganda really kicks in. Ministries and the ICW use school reputations as soft power. You want an alliance with a rising magical economy? You don't just sign a treaty. You send your best and brightest to their school for a semester, slap a joint dueling tournament on the calendar, and suddenly your kids are coming home talking about how Beauxbatons etiquette or Hogwarts aura training is the real benchmark. That's how you colonize people's idea of what proper magic looks like without firing a single spell. Meanwhile, entire magical traditions get downgraded to flavor text. Uagadou's wandless casting? That is a foundational ancient system that makes European wand culture look like training wheels. But in the glossy pamphlets, it's framed like, fun fact, some students don't even need wands. Castelobruxo sits on indigenous Brazilian magic that shaped how half the wizarding world understands plants and creatures, while Ilvermorny is literally built where native magic was already thriving. Those systems get stripped for parts, repackaged as new discoveries, then sold back as electives for bored fifth years. After Voldemort, the ranking shuffle goes into overdrive. Suddenly, being the school known for dark arts, blood purity, or casual giant spiders is bad PR. Shocking. Ministries start loudly backing reformed institutions, sponsoring scholarships at schools with cleaner reputations, and quietly pulling funding from places that make voters nervous. Hogwarts leans hard into battle-tested beacon of resistance. Beauxbatons emphasizes diplomacy and culture. Ilvermorny markets itself as the safe, modern, totally not harboring Death Eater sympathizers option. And then there's Durmstrang. Look, nobody was surprised that certain governments tried to pretend they had no connection to that place after the war. But one school's post-war PR makeover is so aggressive it basically turns into historical revisionism. Whole chunks of its past get scrubbed, rebranded, or blamed on a few bad apples. Yeah. Take a moment. We'll get to that later when we dive into Durmstrang's file and start pulling receipts. So if Durmstrang is out here frantically rewriting its Wikipedia page, where does that leave Hogwarts? Because, look, nobody was surprised that Hogwarts had war trauma. We watched it. Live. For 7 books. Let's start with the chaos resume. You've got a murder snake living in the plumbing for 50 years. Detentions that involve hiking into a monster-infested forest at midnight with a half-giant and no waiver forms. A Tri-Wizard tournament that is supposedly revived for international cooperation and immediately kills a student on school grounds. And then, of course, the castle literally becomes a war zone, with child soldiers dueling Death Eaters in the corridors between the Charms classroom and the exploding suits of armor. Totally normal boarding school experience. And yet, here's the paradox. This is one of the safe schools. If you're wondering how bad the curve is, Hogwarts is considered relatively well-regulated. It has ancient protective enchantments, a staff that is mostly not evil, and at least some oversight from the Ministry, even if that oversight occasionally shows up wearing pink and persecuting children. Compared to schools that answer to nobody, Hogwarts is the kid who turned in their homework covered in bloodstains but technically on time. Underneath that, though, the lore is dark. The founders didn't just have creative differences, they had a full ideological meltdown over blood purity. Salazar Slytherin wanted to keep Muggleborns out. Rowena and Helga said absolutely not, and Godric Gryffindor was ready to throw hands. Slytherin storms off, leaves behind a secret monster chamber keyed to his bigotry, and the school spends the next millennium pretending that's just a quirky architectural feature, which, if you've been paying attention, is kind of the wizarding world's thing. The castle itself sits on layers of older magic. Pre-wand traditions, deep ley lines, the kind of enchantments that feel less like Dumbledore set this up, and more like some unknown witch carved a ritual circle here 1,000 years ago, and nobody wants to poke it too hard. Moving staircases, sentient rooms, portraits that eavesdrop, ghosts with legal tenancy rights. Hogwarts isn't just a school, it's a semi-haunted magical organism that occasionally decides who gets to find what. After Voldemort, Hogwarts finally gets its reform arc. McGonagall takes over, restores the protections, and turns the Battle of Hogwarts into a formal memorial. Instead of that hallway where Fred died, try not to think about it during exams. The cursed revolving door on the Defense Against the Dark Arts job breaks, so students get actual long-term teachers instead of one-year disasters. You can bet lethal tournaments are off the table, cursed artifacts are on a permanent banned list, and the Board of Governors is suddenly very interested in things like safety standards and not hiring Nazis. For now, let's celebrate the fact that detentions probably involve essays instead of acromantulas. And here's your anchor point. If this blood-soaked, basilisk-infested, war-battered castle is the responsible option, wait until we get to the school that weaponizes its students' uniforms to expose dark magic dabblers. Yeah. Take a moment. Hogwarts is the baseline. From here, it only gets weirder. If Hogwarts is the baseline, we need to talk about the hat that literally decides your entire teenage social life in under 60 seconds. Let's start with the Sorting Hat. This allegedly wise, allegedly impartial relic that is absolutely playing favorites. Think about it. One sentient, deeply biased artifact, created by 4 founders with wildly different politics, crawls into your brain at age 11 and assigns you a personality label for the rest of your school career. Brave, clever, kind, evil adjacent. It's the world's most intense BuzzFeed quiz with real-world consequences. If you're wondering why house tables look like 4 separate political parties, it's because the hat isn't just reading you, it's sorting for the founders' values. Salazar Slytherin built in a preference for ambition and pure-blood pride, and that code never got patched. Hogwarts is literally running on racist legacy software, which, if you've been paying attention, explains why Slytherin's reputation never really shakes off the future Death Eater vibe. Officially, Hogwarts has no blood purity rule. Unofficially, the cultural script is brutal. Pureblood families push their kids towards Slytherin. Muggleborns walk in already branded as mudblood by the worst students in green, and house stereotypes do the rest. Gryffindor is for heroes, Ravenclaw for brains, Hufflepuff for leftovers, Slytherin for villains in training. You can say not all Slytherins all you want, but when the war roster is basically one house versus everyone else, yeah. Take a moment. For Muggleborns, Hogwarts is this wild mix of wonder and quiet segregation. You're invited into the wizarding world, handed a wand, and immediately told by a hat and a bunch of portraits which table you belong at. Your friends, your Quidditch chances, even which teachers like you all get filtered through house colors. Nobody writes down. Muggleborns don't get prestige positions. But how many end up as prefects, Quidditch captains, or head boy and girl compared to purebloods? The numbers we do see are not subtle. Then there are the traditions. House rivalries that escalate into hexing people on staircases. A full-contact aerial sport where concussions are basically a hobby. A point system that casually rewards 12-year-olds for fighting giant snakes and breaking into forbidden corridors. Hogwarts keeps sending kids into lethal situations and slapping a gold star on it. McGonagall literally bends the rules for Gryffindor's Quidditch team because talent, while Slytherin buys brooms and everyone pretends this isn't class warfare with snitches. After the war, you know McGonagall and Kingsley looked at all this and went, okay, no, we're done raising dark wizards by accident. Post-war Hogwarts almost has to push house reform, anti-bullying charms on the common room entrances, staff actually intervening in inter-house harassment, curriculum units on how dark arts ideology spread through ordinary school culture. Imagine mandatory seminars on propaganda, blood prejudice, and how Voldemort weaponized house loyalty. Imagine the Sorting Hat being guided to consider balance, not just founder nostalgia. But even with reforms, Hogwarts' prejudice is mostly unofficial, cultural, coded into songs and jokes and who sits where at lunch. The real nightmare starts when a school stops pretending. Durmstrang doesn't just have a Slytherin problem. It bakes discrimination into the admissions letter and treats dark arts like advanced shop class. And if you think that's bad, wait until we get to the schools that turn colonialism, stolen magic, and forced oaths into the actual syllabus. So let's leave Durmstrang's open evil for a second and talk about the school that pretends it's fine. Hogwarts. The cozy, candlelit murder labyrinth you grew up wanting to live in. Because if you're wondering which campus is quietly the most unhinged, it's the one that literally moves under your feet. Let's start with the obvious. Hogwarts is alive. The staircases don't just move, they change their minds about you. Corridors appear and vanish like they're dodging homework. Secret rooms listen in. The room of requirement is basically the castle's subconscious, coughing up whatever you need, or if you've been paying attention, whatever the plot needs. And then there are the portraits. Dozens of ex-headmasters, political climbers, and minor nightmares, gossiping, spying, and preserving centuries of school drama. Hogwarts doesn't just have history, it has a living, opinionated archive hanging on every wall. Now, add ghosts. Hogwarts treats trauma like part of the decor. Nearly headless Nick is literally walking around with a botched execution as his main personality trait. The Grey Lady is quietly carrying a murder story tied to a Horcrux. The Bloody Baron is wearing chains of guilt because he killed her. These aren't background NPCs. They are daily reminders that the castle has seen violence, betrayal, and regret, and decided, yeah, let's schedule that between charms and lunch. And then you've got the cursed locations that everybody just works around. The Forbidden Forest is full of giant spiders, centaurs with attitude, and a history of dark magic rituals, but sure, let's have detention there. The third floor corridor, once home to a Cerberus and a gauntlet of lethal traps. Later just another hallway kids sprint down to make Quidditch practice. The Whomping Willow is a tree that will literally commit assault if you breathe wrong near it, and they keep it on campus like a quirky lawn ornament. Look, nobody was surprised when students ended up in the hospital wing every 5 minutes. After the Battle of Hogwarts, all of that gets turned up to 11. The castle is physically shattered, magically scarred, and emotionally wrecked. New ghosts don't just appear. They arrive with names students recognize from family stories. Staircases that collapsed under Death Eaters get rebuilt. But the stones remember. Classrooms that saw duels keep a charge in the air, the way wands remember spells. McGonagall can hang a memorial plaque, but the real war memorial is the building itself, humming with leftover curses and protective magic that had to choose sides. In future kids, they grow up doing homework in rooms where people died, walking past walls that watched their parents fight, while the portraits quietly update the lore. Hogwarts becomes a place where the past is not past. It's literally eavesdropping on you. For now, let's celebrate that Hogwarts mostly uses its semi-sentience to shuffle staircases and hide broom closets, because the wizarding world has at least one African school where the building doesn't just remember what you did. Its dream magic might see what you're going to do wrong before you even think it. Yeah. Take a moment. From prophetic dream buildings to France's prettiest pressure cooker, let's start with the image the wizarding world loves to sell you. Beauxbatons gliding in on that gigantic powder blue carriage, drawn by literal winged draft horses the size of small houses, descending like a luxury cruise ship that got bored of the ocean. Marble halls, rose gardens, enchanted fountains that probably judge your posture. It's the school brochure come to life. And academically, terrifying. Beauxbatons has a reputation for turning out witches and wizards who are surgical with charms, devastatingly precise with transfiguration, and can navigate etiquette-heavy magic like it's a blood sport. You're not just learning to cast. You're learning which fork to use while you cast, and how to compliment someone's robe while you curse their political career. Grace is part of the curriculum, which, if you've been paying attention, is where things get dark. Because once a school builds its entire personality around elegance and refinement, what happens to kids who don't fit that aesthetic? Beauxbatons quietly became the finishing school of magical aristocracies across France, Belgium, parts of Switzerland, and beyond. Old pureblood and wealthy half-blood families send their heirs there to get polished, networked, and carefully separated from the wrong sort of magic. Look, nobody was surprised that money talks in the wizarding world. But at Beauxbatons, it apparently picks the prefects, funds the best private tutors, and decides which family names get whispered to ministries as future leadership material. If you're Muggle-born, or your robes are last year's cut, you're technically welcome. But are you ever really in the inner circle? Or are you the diversity brochure kid they point to during open house? Now add Vila heritage to the mix. Imagine being 15 and constantly compared to classmates like Fleur Delacour, whose literal genetics are built to be mesmerizing. You're not just competing on grades, you're competing against supernatural charisma, brutal academic standards, cutthroat social hierarchies, and an unspoken ranking of who's Beauxbatons enough could turn that palace into an emotional minefield. Fall behind in charms? You're lazy? Cry in the courtyard? You're dramatic. Don't glide when you walk? Maybe you're just not Beauxbatons material. And during the big wars, Beauxbatons loves the word neutral. During Grindelwald's rise and later Voldemort's chaos, the official line was all diplomacy, cultural exchange, staying above British and German conflicts. Sounds classy, but neutrality when dark regimes rise usually means this. You keep teaching the children of collaborators, you keep taking their donations, and you quietly adjust your curriculum so nobody in power gets too offended. Wartime compromise wrapped in silk. Pattern interrupt for you. Under all that lace and etiquette, we swear Beauxbatons might actually be meaner in a fight than Durmstrang. Think underground dueling salons and mirrored ballrooms, wards that only open for students who can break 3 curses in under a minute, and a whole tradition of defensive hexes that are legally defensive only if your lawyer is very creative. The delicate flower school? Yeah. Take a moment, because if Beauxbatons is the polished palace with a rotten core, wait until you see the school that doesn't even pretend it's not flirting with the dark arts. Durmstrang doesn't bother with flowers. It just hands you the poison. If Durmstrang hands you the poison, Beauxbatons smiles while you drink it. Because under all that silk and sparkle, this place is running a long-term social experiment in weaponized beauty. Let's start with Fleur. Canonically gorgeous, part Vila, walks into Hogwarts and half the school forgets how to form sentences. Her allure is treated like a punchline. Ron drooling at the Yule Ball, boys tripping over themselves, even Mrs. Weasley side-eyeing her like she's hypnotized Bill into liking French food. The joke is always that Fleur is too much, and her Vila charm is this silly, embarrassing superpower she can't turn off. Now imagine that, but institutionalized. You think Beauxbatons doesn't notice which students can literally bend a room's emotions by existing? Come on. This is a school that shows up to the Tri-Wizard tournament in a choreographed entrance with birds and blue silk. Appearance isn't an accident. It's a curriculum. If you're wondering where this gets dark, it's right here. Consent. Vila magic blurs the line between genuine attraction and magically juiced obsession. In a castle full of teenagers, some of whom can involuntarily crank up desire, jealousy, and loyalty, you're basically living inside a magically enhanced soap opera. Who actually likes you, and who's just caught in the aura? Who's responsible when a crowd turns violent because someone with Vila blood got scared and their magic spiked? Beauxbatons has 2 choices: pretend it's fine, or admit this is an ethical nightmare. So, behind all the rose gardens and floating candles, you almost have to assume there's a quiet program for charm management. Breathing drills, emotional dampening, glamours that mute the Vila effect during exams and official events. And then, for the especially talented, the opposite. Advanced courses where they're told, very politely, to lean in. Because in the European wizarding world, a poised, devastatingly charming Beauxbatons graduate is basically a guided missile. Need a trade deal pushed through the International Confederation of Wizards? Send the alum who can walk into a room and have half the delegation agreeing with her before she finishes pouring the tea. Need information out of a hostile official? You don't always need Veritaserum when you have a smile that scrambles short-term memory. After Voldemort, when everyone is rebuilding ministries, rewriting treaties, and pretending they were never pro-Dark Lord to begin with, Beauxbatons graduates quietly end up everywhere. Diplomatic corps, international law, cultural liaison, roles that are just espionage with better outfits. While Hogwarts is producing battle-scarred aurors, Beauxbatons is sending out soft-spoken negotiators who can end a blood feud in an afternoon, or start one with a look. For now, let's celebrate the idea that the wizarding world's most powerful political operators might be former choir girls with Vila grandmothers. But if Beauxbatons turns beauty into a weapon, our next school goes deeper. It doesn't mess with your eyes, it crawls into your sleep, because somewhere out there, a headmaster looked at prophecy, looked at teenagers and said, "Great, let's put those together." A whole institution built on weaponized dreams is coming up, and yeah, take a moment. From weaponized dreams to weaponized teenagers, let's start with the school that looked at the dark arts and didn't just flirt with them. It sent them flowers and a handwritten love letter. Durmstrang. Remote, frozen, and apparently sponsored by hypothermia. Canon tells us it's somewhere in the far north of Europe, hidden away in snow, ice, and vibes that scream mandatory military school. While Hogwarts has cozy fires and feasts, Durmstrang has martial magic, battle spells, advanced dueling, physical endurance that feels less like PE and more like survive this blizzard with only a wand and poor life choices. And unlike Hogwarts, which technically teaches defense against the dark arts, Durmstrang just drops the defense. They study the dark arts themselves, directly. Curiously omitted from the brochure. If you're wondering who actually gets to freeze their wand handoff up there, the answer is not Muggleborns. Durmstrang is one of the only officially recognized schools that bakes blood prejudice right into admissions. No Muggle-born students allowed. Not, you might face bullying, but you will never even see the front gate. It's institutional discrimination as policy, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly how you grow the next generation of Grindelwald fanboys. Culturally, the place runs on survival of the fittest energy. Think less house points for kindness, and more house points for not dying in a duel. Reputation matters. Power matters. Being able to hex faster than the person across the table absolutely matters. Empathy, ethics, those are electives at best, and nobody's signing up. You get a culture where students are encouraged to push boundaries, test forbidden spells, and treat dark magic like an extreme sport. After a few generations of that, you don't just have a school, you have an export industry in morally flexible alumni. And then Durmstrang looked at its own track record and said, you know who should be headmaster? A former Death Eater? Enter Igor Karkaroff. The man who literally sold out fellow Death Eaters to save himself ends up running a school already infamous for dark arts and blood prejudice. Yeah. Take a moment. His leadership locks in the reputation. Durmstrang becomes the place where reformed dark wizards network, recruit, and quietly compare skull tattoos over staff meetings. After the war, when Karkaroff disappears and reportedly gets what was coming to him, couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Durmstrang scrambles to rebrand. New head, new rhetoric, same very awkward alumni list. Post-war, they tone down the public dark arts talk, clean up the prospectus, and pretend the whole Death Eater era was a weird phase. But the wizarding world has a long memory, and rumor travels faster than a flu call. Because some witches and wizards whisper that Durmstrang isn't even the darkest school on the continent. That somewhere east, in a place the Confederation doesn't put on its nice official list, dark arts aren't an edgy elective. They're mandatory, and that school, that's where we're going next. Durmstrang's problem after Voldemort wasn't subtle. When the most infamous dark wizard of the age is literally your exchange student from Hell's biggest fan base, you don't just go back to class like, anyway, turn to page 394. The wizarding world was watching, hard. Let's start with the politics. The International Confederation of Wizards, which, if you've been paying attention, loves its clean, respectable list of 11 schools, could not afford one of them looking like Death Eater Academy. Ministries from Britain to Bulgaria suddenly cared very deeply about Durmstrang's image, because nobody wanted a fresh wave of masked fanboys popping up a decade later going, "We studied abroad." So you'd get ICW committees, stern letters, and very polite threats about accreditation, funding, and international portkey access. Publicly, Durmstrang would pivot fast. Dark arts class? Rebranded overnight as something like comparative historical magic. Same curses, new name, now with extra disclaimers. You'd see symbolic firings or early retirements of the most notorious staff, the ones with skull jewelry and a Grindelwald poster still in the office. A new headmaster with a tragic backstory and a very rehearsed speech about learning from our past, and a full-blown PR campaign trotting out every vaguely decent alumnus they can find. Dragon Keepers, Curse Breakers, that one healer who definitely never hexed a patient on purpose. Look, nobody was surprised that some of this would be cosmetic. Because inside the castle, the old blood runs deep. Generations of pure-blood families who sent their kids to Durmstrang precisely because it didn't flinch at dark magic are not just going to shrug and say, you know what, let's do mindfulness charms instead. So you'd get the quiet resistance, unofficial dueling clubs meeting in frozen courtyards after curfew, private tutelage from retired professors who just happen to be visiting, heavily redacted textbooks where the margin notes are more honest than the printed content. If you're wondering what it felt like to be a student in that mess, awkward. You want power because everyone saw what happened to people who couldn't defend themselves in the war, But you also don't want your wand confiscated at customs, because your school is on every Auror's watch list. So you'd have kids padding their resumes with international internships, trying to study at Beauxbatons for a term, or over-explaining in job interviews. No, my specialization in counter curses is totally not code for I love dark arts. Thank you so much. Now, pattern interrupt. While Durmstrang is scrambling for a personality makeover, you know who's just chilling? Uagadou. The African school that's older than most European ministries and casually teaches wandless magic like it's basic algebra. Uagadou doesn't need a PR rebrand because it was never built on exclusion or flirtation with fascist fanboys. It's what Durmstrang pretends to be in the brochures. Powerful, disciplined, globally respected. And we're heading there next. Because if you want to see what magical education looks like when it doesn't spend a century flirting with Dark Lords, Uagadou is the blueprint. If Uagadou is the ancient scholar who minds its business and masters the cosmos, Ilvermorny is the overexcited exchange student screaming, "We invented school spirit!" while standing on stolen land. Welcome to North America's shiny hilltop castle, built on a very messy, magical foundation. Let's start with the brochure version. Ilvermorny sits on Mount Greylock, all misty stone towers and patriotic vibes, founded by Isolde Sayer, a runaway Irish witch descended from Salazar Slytherin. She marries no-mage James Stewart, adopts some orphaned wizard kids, and apparently decides, you know what this cursed continent needs? A boarding school. They carve out 4 houses named after local magical creatures. Horned Serpent for brainy, introspective types, Wampus for warriors, Thunderbird for adventurers, and Pukwudgie for chaotic healer snipers with crossbows. It's Hogwarts with a New World skin. But if you're wondering when we talk about the part where this all happens during active colonization, yeah, take a moment. Ilvermorny is founded while European settlers are still showing up with smallpox, guns, and absolutely no chill, which, if you've been paying attention, is already a giant red flag. European wand magic doesn't arrive in a vacuum. It lands in a continent that already has deep, sophisticated indigenous magical traditions, shaped by millennia of relationship with land and spirits. Official lore loves to tell you how Isolde befriends Native American witches and wizards, learns their lore, and meets creatures like horned serpents in the wild. She listens to their stories, discovers they don't even need wands for a lot of magic, and sees kids doing wandless, wordless stuff Hogwarts students couldn't dream of. Then what happens? She ends up packaging those beings and practices into a familiar European format. House mascots, wands for everyone, castle on a hill, sorting ceremonies. It's the magical version of, wow, your culture is beautiful. I'm going to name my school after it and put my family crest on the front gate. The indigenous communities never get equal authorship or control over Ilvermorny's curriculum. Their magic becomes flavor text for a very European institution. And then there are the Pukwudgies. Look, nobody was surprised the wizarding world found yet another way to get free labor, but Ilvermorny goes for a full creature workforce. Isolde saves one Pukwudgie, William, who grudgingly helps her. Cute meat disaster. For now, let's celebrate. Except William's, fine, I'll protect your descendants, promise somehow turns into an entire species, becoming the school's unpaid security, medics, and general staff. Did every Pukwudgie sign a contract? Do they have unions? Are they allowed to leave? We'll get to that later, but the vibes are one Dementor away from Azkaban HR. Ilvermorny sells this "we're all one big melting pot" narrative, where European, indigenous, and creature magic live together in harmony under a shiny new roof. But hold that thought, because when we swing back to Uagadou's wand-optional, sky-carved educational empire, you're going to see what magical schooling looks like when it never needed European validation in the first place. But Ilvermorny doesn't just sell unity with its brochure copy. It bakes it into your personality, literally from day one. You don't even get a timetable until a bunch of statues decide what kind of person you are. Let's start with the basics. Ilvermorny has 4 houses: Horned Serpent, Wampus, Thunderbird, and Pukwudgie. Each one is tied to a part of the self. Horned serpent is the mind, the book brain, the introspective thinkers and seers. Wampus is the body, the fighters and athletes who would have absolutely dominated at quadpot practice. Thunderbird is the soul, the restless explorers who treat every field trip like a spiritual awakening. And Pukwudji is the heart, the healers and helpers, the ones who would bring you soup and also your overdue homework. If you're wondering how you get in, no hat, no quiz, no pick a hallway and trauma walk to your destiny. You stand in the center of the entrance hall while 4 giant house statues react. Horned serpent's crystal glows, Wampus roars, Thunderbird flaps its wings, Pukwudji raises its arrow. One responds, you're in. Sometimes more than one responds, and then you choose. Double choice. House picks you, you pick house. On paper, very democratic. Hogwarts could never. The Sorting Hat literally reads your mind and argues with 11-year-olds. But look, nobody was surprised that this freedom of choice veneer comes with baggage. Because what Ilvermorny actually did was strap indigenous beings and symbols onto a very European house system and call it harmony. The horned serpent, the wampus cat, the thunderbird, the Pukwudgiabachween. These aren't random fantasy mascots. They're pulled from living native traditions and stories, then flattened into school branding. It's like taking sacred figures and turning them into Quidditch logos, which, if you've been paying attention, is kind of the Ilvermorny brand. Take native magic, run it through a British boarding school filter, and sell it as New World Wizarding. You get this weird dissonance where kids are debating whether they're more soul or body while standing under a Thunderbird statue that, in some real-world cultures, is a powerful, complex spirit being, not your dorm's emotional support bird. Now picture Native American witches and wizards walking into that hall. Your grandparents' stories are suddenly school decor. Your community's guardians are talking points in a personality quiz. Do you feel seen, or do you feel repackaged? If you're sorted into Pukwudji, are you honoring a being your ancestors respected, or are you cosplaying as it for house points? For now, let's celebrate that Ilvermorny at least pretends to treat magical creatures as partners and protectors, not monsters to be locked up. But keep that in your back pocket, because the next school we're heading to, its relationship with local magic is less collaboration and more armed wildlife management program with homework. Yeah. Take a moment. Ilvermorny looks cute on the surface. Castle on a mountain, house statues, Pukwudji Hall monitors with crossbows. But after Voldemort, the vibe shifts from magical boarding school to federal facility with extra charms. Let's start with Makusa, because if you're wondering who panicked hardest after the Battle of Hogwarts, it was the people whose entire personality is secrecy. These are the folks who outlawed fraternizing with no mage for fun. So, when news filters in that one snake-faced British war criminal almost toppled an entire government by radicalizing school kids, Makusa looks at Ilvermorny and goes, absolutely not, lock it down. Foreign exchange programs with Hogwarts and Beauxbatons quietly dry up. Guest lecturers from Europe get vetted like they're applying to be Auror-in-Chief. Anything that smells like mysterious foreign philosophy of power gets buried in a locked, restricted section that already had 3 locks and a screaming book. And in America, the fear isn't just dark wizards, it's exposure. Because while Hogwarts worried about one newspaper and the occasional Rita Skeeter special, Ilvermorny lives in a country with mass media, CCTV, satellite imagery, and that one kid who wants to go viral on a no-mage livestream by accidentally levitating his math homework. You sneeze near a no-mage drone with a wand out? Congratulations, you just started a congressional hearing. So Makusa doubles down. Stronger muggle-repelling charms around the mountain. Monitoring spells on apparition points. Quiet little memos about increased vigilance in student correspondence, which, if you've been paying attention, is Wizarding World code for, we're reading your mail, kids. Yeah. Take a moment. Inside the classrooms, the curriculum mutates. Defense against the dark arts isn't just how to block a jinx anymore. It's counter-terrorism magic. Pattern recognition charms for spotting radical recruitment. Units on how charismatic dark leaders weaponize prophecy, blood status, and trauma. History of Magic suddenly comes with a brutal new module, intercontinental dark arts movements. From Grindelwald to Voldemort to every wannabe cult leader who tried to copy them. There's more magical law, too. Ilvermorny students are drilled on jurisdiction, international treaties, and what happens when a British Death Eater tries to hide in New Jersey. Spoiler, paperwork. So much paperwork. But kids aren't just swallowing the paranoia. They've heard Harry's story. They know the adults in Britain lied, minimized, and gaslit an entire generation. Ilvermorny students start asking ugly questions. Why are Pukwudgies treated like grumpy security guards instead of equal partners? Why are indigenous North American magical traditions a 2-week elective instead of the backbone of the syllabus? Why did a school founded with indigenous help end up teaching mostly European wand lore? Student groups push for creature rights charters that actually protect Pukwudgies from being ordered around. They demand more Wampanoag, Mohawk, Navajo, and other indigenous magic in core classes, not just as a cute cultural appreciation unit. Some even argue that the best way to stop another Voldemort is to stop pretending European wizarding history is the default template for magical power. And just when you're settling into American paranoia and protest signs, hard cut. Because if Ilvermorny's worst nightmare is being seen by no Mars, Castelobruxo's worst nightmare is being seen by the rainforest. The Brazilian school doesn't worry about cameras. It worries about carnivorous vines, territorial spirits, and potion poachers who treat the jungle like a self-service crime buffet. Different continent, different school, and the danger level turned up to 11. Castelobruxo is what happens when your school campus is also a boss fight. Hidden deep in the Brazilian rainforest, this place is a massive golden, temple-like fortress that looks like someone fused a Maya pyramid with a Gringotts vault, and then cranked the magic up to 11. Let's start with the setting, because it's ridiculous in the best way. The whole complex is wrapped in enchantments that repel muggles, scramble satellite images, and gently convince lost hikers they meant to turn around 3 miles ago. The stone glows with old magic. The walls shift, and the paths reroute themselves if anything even vaguely hostile comes near. And if you're wondering what the students look like inside this jungle fortress, bright green uniforms, blending into the canopy just enough that predators and poachers don't get an easy target. But Castelobruxo isn't just a cool backdrop, it's a shield. The school sits at the heart of some of the most powerful magical ecosystems on the planet, guarding colonies of creatures and plants that make Hogwarts' Forbidden Forest look like a mildly aggressive community garden. We're talking thunderbirds, riding stormfronts, carnivorous vines that drink magic, and spirits that do not care about your exam schedule. Staff and students end up as frontline defenders, whether they signed up for it or not. Because here's the problem. When your backyard is full of rare potion ingredients and living artifacts, every dark wizard entrepreneur and shady corporation suddenly discovers a deep love for Brazilian biodiversity. Illegal poaching rings creep in at night. Corporate-backed research teams show up with forged permits, and the whole rainforest gets treated like a self-service crime buffet. Field trips? Those are patrols with homework. You're cataloging herbs, while also making sure nobody is chainsawing a sentient tree. That's why Castelobruxo's curriculum is basically survival training with a grading rubric. Herbology isn't just, let's pot some puffapods. It's, identify the leaf that cures dragonpox before the plant decides your lunch. Care of magical creatures involves negotiating with territorial beasts that could swallow a first year and still be peckish. Defensive magic is less exam spell practice and more skills you need to not die on your way to breakfast. Yeah. Take a moment. And then there are the rumors. Because apparently, Castelobruxo initiation isn't just a sorting ceremony. It's an experience. Whispers say, older students and spirits oversee a night in magically amplified jungle zones, where every sound is louder, every creature is smarter, and every plant is mildly offended you exist. An unhinged scavenger hunt where the jungle is also hunting you. Is it real? Is it a scare story to keep first years from wandering off? We'll get to that later, but let's just say, in this school, the line between legend and Tuesday night is very, very thin. So when Castelobruxo tells you, we're going on a field trip, you don't pack a packed lunch. You write a will. Let's start with the rite of passage. Every upper year whispers about the deep jungle assignments, not some cute stroll around the grounds. We're talking week-long treks into magically amplified rainforest zones, cataloging plants that spit venom and creatures that can legally count as natural disasters. And the professors? Oh, they're supervising. From a very safe distance, up in enchanted tree blinds, wrapped in disillusionment charms, sipping anti-venom tea while students are down below arguing with a carnivorous orchid about whether it's technically sentient. If you're wondering what Castelobruxo considers biology homework, it's identify this creature, survive it trying to eat you, and then write 3 feet of parchment about its mating habits. But the jungle isn't the only thing trying to kill you. Because Castelobruxo isn't just a school, it's basically the frontline defense for half the magical rainforest in South America. That makes it a magnet for magical poachers and dark potion brewers who look at endangered beasts and think, wow, ingredients? So your quiet research trip can turn into an armed standoff with a gang of smugglers who really want that Thunderbird egg you just found. Look, nobody was surprised when those confrontations started getting baked into the curriculum. Defensive herbology, applied beast negotiation, totally normal classes where the final exam is don't die while stopping a black market basilisk fang deal. Students learn shield charms, tracking magic, counter curses for binding hexes, all while pretending this is just extra credit. And because this is the wizarding world, apparently someone decided to make it even more intense with school oaths. Imagine being 11 and swearing a magically binding vow to protect the forest. Break it, tip off a poacher, sell a rare plant to some shady apothecary, and the magic remembers. We're talking cursed scars that burn whenever you cross the wards, or a mark that brands you as Oathbreaker, so every serious witch and wizard knows you sold out the rainforest. If you've been paying attention, you know that kind of magic doesn't just affect your skin. Growing up in a constant low-level war for the environment shapes people. Castelobruxo graduates end up hyper-competent, hyper-vigilant, and one bad noise away from hexing a coat rack. They're the ones who walk into a peaceful conference and automatically map all exits, all wards, all possible ambush points, while everyone else is still picking seats. For now, let's celebrate that at least somebody is protecting magical ecosystems. But it comes at a cost. Trauma as a teaching tool is a choice. And while Castelobruxo is out here turning field trips into survival campaigns, another school isn't just guarding land. It's sitting on a mountain, quietly rewriting what magic even is. Yeah, take a moment. Because once we climb up there, the rules of the game stop making sense completely. Mahoutokoro is what happens if you build a boarding school on hard mode. Tiny volcanic island, middle of the Japanese Ocean, ringed by cliffs and storm. While Hogwarts kids are rowing across a cute little lake, Mahoutokoro students are commuting on enchanted storm petrels, literally surfing typhoons to get to class. If you're wondering, yes, your school run can be canceled by an actual tsunami warning. The castle itself? Compact, layered, obsessively organized, dorms stacked tight, courtyards small, schedules brutal. You live, study, and train in this pressure cooker of discipline where the walls probably have a better work ethic than you, which, if you've been paying attention, is the perfect environment for what Mahoutokoro is really famous for. Not its Quidditch, its clothes. Let's start with the robes. At 11, you don't just get a supply list. You get issued one set of enchanted school robes. They grow with you, repair themselves, and quietly monitor your entire academic life like a wearable report card that never turns off. Do well in class, follow the rules, and your robes shift into this rich rose gold color that basically screams model student from 50 meters away. Slack off, cheat, or start dabbling in stuff you shouldn't? The color dulls. Everyone can see it. Your friends, your professors, the kid you have a crush on. And if you go near dark magic, if you experiment with the magical equivalent of a cursed YouTube tutorial at 2 a.m., the robes turn white. Not cool, mysterious, anime protagonist white. Public, blinding. This person has flirted with the dark arts, white. Look, nobody was surprised that Durmstrang openly toys with dark magic. Mahoutokoro does something creepier. It outs you. Instantly. You can't hide behind good test scores or a fake smile. Your robes literally snitch on you the second you cross a line. That constant visible feedback loop becomes social control. High performers glow. Underperformers walk the halls wearing their mediocrity. Dark arts dabblers might as well carry a flashing sign. Imagine the conversations. Why are your robes looking a little pale this week? Oh, nothing. Just accidentally summoned a minor cursed spirit during lunch. For now, let's celebrate the fact Hogwarts only has house points and awkward parent letters. Because at Mahoutokoro, the surveillance doesn't stop at the school gates. Parents track robe color like stock prices. A rose gold kid, future ministry official, elite Quidditch player, excellent marriage prospects, a chronically dull robe. Maybe you don't get that prestigious apprenticeship. A white robe scandal that can follow your family name, your career, your social standing for life. And the Japanese magical authorities absolutely use that data. Why waste time on entrance exams when your entire adolescence is color-coded? Pattern interrupt. Compare that to Hogwarts, where you can secretly own a cursed diary, sneak into the Forbidden Forest, duel a Dark Lord in the basement, and as long as you pass your OWLs, everyone shrugs. Chaotic, yes. But weirdly freer? Mahoutokoro wraps discipline around your body. Another school doesn't need robes at all because its students can pull off complex wandless magic with a glance. And when your eyes are that powerful, you don't need fabric to watch you. Mahoutokoro looks gorgeous from the sky. Jade Palace, storm clouds, robes that literally level up like an RPG. But once you land, those robes turn your entire adolescence into a walking report card. Let's start with the academic arms race. At Hogwarts, you get an O on an exam and maybe McGonagall looks pleased for half a second. At Mahoutokoro, you ace your work, and your robes deepen into this rich, triumphant gold that everyone can see from across the Quidditch pitch. Fall behind and that gold dulls. Slip far enough, and you're flirting with white. Every test, every essay, every minor mistake is broadcast on your body. You're not just failing charms, you're humiliating yourself in the hallway. So of course it becomes a competition. Of course people obsess. You think nobody ever tried to charm someone's ink to blur during exams? You don't think a few desperate third years brewed a little focus potion that was definitely not ministry approved? When your social life, your self-worth, and your parents' pride are stitched into your sleeves, cheating starts to look less like breaking rules and more like survival. And that's where the dark magic temptation creeps in. Because the robes don't just track grades, they flare white if you actually dabble in the dark arts. Public. Instant. Magical scarlet letter. Sounds like a great deterrent, right? Sounds like a great... Except if you're wondering what that really does to a curious, stressed out teenager, it's not stop them completely. It's push them underground. If your options are ask a professor about a disturbing spell you found and risk your robes betraying you, or quietly find an older student who already crossed the line and knows how to hide it. Yeah. Take a moment. Mahoutokoro accidentally creates a perfect recruiting tool for secret dark mentors. The kids who are most scared of exposure are the least likely to seek legitimate help, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly how you grow the kind of wizards who smile politely in class and experiment with unforgivable stuff in locked towers at 3 a.m. layer on cultural expectations. We're talking a school in a country where honor, discipline, and obedience are already huge social values. Now imagine coming home for summer with robes that are slightly less gold than your cousins. Your failure isn't just you got a P in potions, it's a perceived stain on the family. Parents comparing robe shades at the train station, grandparents quietly asking what went wrong. You're not just scared of detention, you're scared of shame. After Voldemort, that shame gets weaponized even harder. The global wizarding world is panicking about dark wizards, so Mahoutokoro can point at its color-coded student body and say, "Look, nobody was surprised. We have no dark wizards here. Our robes would tell us." So they double down on surveillance, double down on robe enchantments, double down on the fantasy that visible purity equals real safety, whether or not that's actually true. Because while Mahoutokoro is busy policing fabric, another school doesn't care what you wear at all. Uagadou watches your dreams instead. And when a place trains teenagers who can rewrite your memories before you wake up, the robe problem starts to look almost comforting. We'll get to that later. Mahoutokoro hears all that and goes, cute. Anyway, back to our death sports. Because while Uagadou is creeping into your subconscious, Japan's wizarding school is turning the sky into a live-fire training ground with better uniforms. Let's start with the reputation. Mahoutokoro's Quidditch teams are not good for a school. They're good. Full stop. Canon literally tells us students play at professional level, which, if you've been paying attention, is insane. These are teenagers who finish newts and then just walk straight onto the Japanese national team. No farm league, no awkward reserve bench era. You graduate, you get a jersey, but it's not just that they're good. It's how they play. High above the open ocean, around this tiny enchanted island, in winds that would make a firebolt cry. You fall at Hogwarts, you break a bone and Madame Pomfrey sighs at you. You fall at Mahoutokoro, over deep water, in a storm, with magic scrambled by salt spray and crosswinds, and suddenly the stakes are, hope your shield charm holds or you're not coming back. Yeah. Take a moment. If you're wondering why any responsible adult signs off on that, remember, in this world, sport is never just sport. Those brutal, high-altitude matches double as combat drills. You're learning formation flying, situational awareness, spellcasting under pressure, and how to keep your head when the sky is trying to kill you. It's Quidditch, sure, but it's also basic aerial warfare, and the Japanese magical community eats it up. For now, let's celebrate how perfectly this fits the propaganda machine. Mahoutokoro's Quidditch record becomes a national flex. Our children are disciplined, our training superior, our loyalty unquestioned. Every World Cup star who came up through Mahoutokoro turns into a walking poster. Proof that their system works, that their robe-based morality and strict obedience produce elite Sky Warrior citizens. Look, nobody was surprised when that bled into student identity. If your culture idolizes broom-riding champions who literally patrol the clouds, what happens to the kid who loves arithmancy and gets motion sick on a school broom? You end up with a hierarchy inside the hierarchy. Golden-robed, top-grade students who also dominate the pitch basically become untouchable. Pink-tinged robes and no athletic talent enjoy being background scenery while the Star Seekers get scouted by national coaches. And because robe color already broadcasts academic performance and supposed purity, Quidditch success stacks on top like a second badge of worth. You're not just smart and loyal. You're battle-tested in the sky. The message to everyone else is clear. If you're not up there, dodging bludgers over shark-infested water, you're not really Mahoutokoro at its best. So we've got one school turning sports into a militarized air force. But what happens when a school doesn't need brooms at all? When students can call storms without a wand and turn the sky itself into their stadium? Because Uagadou's star players don't ride the weather. They command it. With their hands. Uagadou doesn't just break the rules of Quidditch. It breaks the rules of what the wizarding world even calls real magic. Let's start with the setting, because this place is built like a legend. Uagadou is carved straight into the side of a mountain somewhere in the heart of Africa. So high and so old that most European wizards couldn't find it with a stack of enchanted maps and a GPS charm. The school appears as a vast stone edifice, often wrapped in mist, literally looking down over the clouds while everyone else argues about house points. At night, the whole mountain face glows with runes and star maps, tying into its obsession with astronomy. And if you're wondering about letters, owls don't even make the cut here. Potential students get dream messages. You're asleep, minding your own business, and suddenly an ancestor, a lion, or a robed figure appears in your dreams and calmly tells you, by the way, you're magical. Pack your things. Yeah? Take a moment. While Hogwarts kids are waiting for the mail, Uagadou kids are literally being recruited in their subconscious. That alone tells you what kind of magic we're dealing with. Uagadou is famous for wandless magic, not party trick, wandless magic. We're talking large-scale transfiguration, intricate astronomy-based spell work, and self-transfiguration so advanced, Anamagi look like first years playing dress-up. Students learn to call storms with their hands, reshape stone with a gesture, and map the heavens without ever pulling a stick of wood out of their robes. This isn't, I forgot my wand on the train. This is, I am the wand. So, of course, European magical scholars spent centuries calling that primitive. Look, nobody was surprised. The same crowd that thought blood purity was a personality trait also decided that if you weren't using a European-style wand, you weren't doing proper magic. Which, if you've been paying attention, sounds a lot like colonial arrogance dressed up as academic opinion. Wand-making families, European ministries, and even Hogwarts textbooks quietly framed wand magic as the pinnacle, while the Uagadou was treated like an exotic side note. But politically, that bias is a security nightmare, because if your entire idea of who's armed is who's holding a wand, Uagadou graduates can walk into any international summit looking harmless. No visible weapon, no flashy holster, just calm, polite witches and wizards who can disillusion themselves, tweak memories, or transfigure the floor out from under you with a flick of their fingers. You get why certain ministries are nervous, right? Here's your pattern interrupt. Compared to Uagadou, Hogwarts looks loud. British magic is big on shouting Latin, waving sticks, and firing colored light across the room like a magical laser tag arena. Uagadou's power is quiet, internal, and terrifyingly controlled. For now, let's celebrate the Stormcallers and Stone Shapers. Because Uagadou's real flex? It isn't what they do with the sky. It's what they do with dreams and memories. We'll get to that later, when we talk about the schools that don't just teach spells. They rewrite how you remember learning them. Dream letters and star maps. Uagadou doesn't send owls. It sends your subconscious. Imagine being 12, falling asleep, and instead of stressing about homework, you get a crystal-clear dream of a robed figure pointing at a distant mountain and then at you. No envelopes, no crest, just destiny, live-streamed into your REM cycle. Let's start with that recruitment flex. These aren't vague, hazy, maybe I dreamed a wizard moments. Canon says Uagadou students receive dream visions from a representative who literally points to the school. So by the time you wake up, you're not wondering if you're magical. You're wondering how fast you can pack. It skips the whole Hogwarts, please don't let my letter be lost by the Dursleys trauma, and jumps straight to, oh, I was chosen by the universe. And Uagadou doesn't stop at dreams. They're watching the sky, constantly. This is a school built on a mountain above the clouds, staring straight into the cosmos like it's their personal course catalog. Star charts, comet paths, planetary alignments. This is their version of standardized testing. Except, instead of bubbling in answers, your magical potential is literally written in constellations. If you're wondering how far that goes, think about it. If you can read talent in the stars, why not read trouble? A rare conjunction over Eastern Europe. Maybe that's a future Grindelwald situation. An eclipse slicing across coastal cities? That might light up a map of where Muggle-wizard tensions are about to boil over. Uagadou's astronomers aren't just picking prefects. They might be quietly tracking future political flashpoints before anyone else in the wizarding world even feels a chill. And then you add prophecy and dreamwalking to the mix. Yeah. Take a moment. While Hogwarts is busy locking up its one seer in a tower with cooking sherry, Uagadou has probably trained generations of disciplined, lucid dream mages who can step into your nightmares, tidy up your memories, and plant a single, perfectly calibrated idea. No wands, no traces, just a minister who wakes up suddenly convinced that maybe those anti-giant laws are a terrible look. Look, nobody was surprised that a school this powerful ended up in a moral gray zone. You can absolutely imagine the staff arguments. On one side, the greater good crowd. If you can nudge a dictator away from genocide with one dream, how do you not do that? On the other side, the free will purists who look at Dumbledore's secret keeper schemes, his Hallows obsession, his whole let Harry walk into death plan and say, yeah, let's not become that. Which, if you've been paying attention, is the quiet horror of Uagadou. Their influence doesn't look like Durmstrang's marching Death Eaters. It looks like a generation of leaders who think they arrived at their own ideas. never realizing their fate was gently edited in the middle of the night. And while Uagadou reads the sky, rumor says another African school doesn't look up at all. It digs down. Buried so deep the ICW barely admits it exists, and its specialty isn't dreams or stars. It's weaponizing history itself. We'll get to that later. Uagadou after the war is the school that didn't need a redemption arc. While Hogwarts was literally rebuilding its walls and its reputation, Uagadou was looking at the European mess like, you all hired snake-face fascists? Twice. And thought wands were the problem? Yeah. Take a moment. Let's start with insulation. Voldemort's war is this seismic generational trauma in Britain and Western Europe. Ministries collapsing, schools occupied, kids drafted into a magical civil war. But Uagadou, perched in the mountains of the moon, has always played a different game. Its students literally appear in the sky when they're chosen. Its teachers are used to reading omens, storms, droughts, border conflicts, not bald guy with diary issues. If you're wondering why it didn't end up a smoking crater, it's because the threats in that region weren't wearing Death Eater masks. They were older, slower, tied to land, spirits, and history, not one British guy's Horcrux hobby. So when Voldemort falls, something wild happens. European institutions look shaky. Grindelwald, Durmstrang, Death Eaters, the Triwizard body count, not a great PR reel. Suddenly, Uagadou's whole non-wand tradition stops looking exotic and starts looking like, oh, you can't have your wand snapped and instantly become useless. In a world that just watched wands be disarmed, stolen, and literally turned against their owners, wandless magic looks like the magical equivalent of having offline backups. And the soft power glow-up is real. Parents in France, Britain, even Ilvermorny grads with money and guilt start asking, where can my kid learn to defend themselves without relying on a stick? Cue experimental exchange programs. Officially, they're all about intercultural understanding. Unofficially, it's Hogwarts sending shell-shocked 7th years to a mountain school where a 12-year-old can turn into mist and bench press a storm cloud. Imagine Hermione visiting as an envoy and watching a class of 2nd years practice silent, wandless shield charms the size of Quidditch hoops. Imagine some Beauxbatons legacy kid realizing nobody at Uagadou cares what your surname is if you can't hold a transfiguration for more than 10 seconds. That kind of cultural cross-pollination is amazing and awkward, because while they're learning from each other, they're also quietly ranking each other. Who's primitive? Who's arrogant? Who's been underestimating whom for centuries? Which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly where the ICW politics kick off. Uagadou has been one of the 11 official schools forever, but the rules, the treaties, the international law, written in very European ink. Post-war, when Britain is busy cleaning up Azkaban and pretending it never let Dementors babysit, Uagadou's headmaster walks into those ICW meetings with receipts. You want our graduates in your Auror offices, your research teams, your cursed zone cleanups? Cool. Then you start recognizing non-European magical classifications, ancestral land protections, and wandless practitioners in your legal definitions of qualified wizard. For now, let's celebrate that quiet power grab, because it's subtle and it works. While Hogwarts is healing and Durmstrang is being Durmstrang, Uagadou is becoming the place you go when you're serious about surviving the next catastrophe, not just winning the last war. But while Uagadou is calmly ascending, reading the stars and rewriting the rules, another school isn't interested in stability at all. It's buried deep in Eastern Europe. It leans straight into chaos, and its students train in a forest that might actually hate them back. Welcome to Koldovstoretz, the school that heard Forbidden Forest and said, cute, hold my vodka. If Hogwarts is dangerous, this place is the full survival DLC. Canon gives us crumbs. It's in Russia. The students play Quidditch standing on uprooted trees instead of brooms. And everyone keeps hinting at massive, ominous forests nearby like that's totally fine. Let's start with that Quidditch detail, because it's doing a lot of heavy lifting. You don't casually rip trees out of the ground and surf them through the air unless your entire magical culture is built on improvisation and brute force spellwork. Picture it. No sleek nimbus. No polished firebolt. Just a screaming birch trunk you yanked out of the permafrost 5 minutes ago, still dropping clods of dirt on the pitch. If you're wondering what the curriculum looks like at a place that treats landscaping as a contact sport, it's probably one long make do or die workshop. Transfiguration class, turning half-rotten logs into emergency sleds, rafts, and if you're late for exams, high-speed battering rams. Charms, converting blizzards into temporary invisibility cloaks, snowdrifts into impact-absorbing cushions, and icicles into guided projectiles your professor definitely does not want to know about. Defense Against the Dark Arts here is not some theoretical essay about hinky punks. It's, you have 10 minutes of daylight, 3 matches, and something in that tree line that just learned your name. Long, dark winters aren't a vibe. They're a semester. The school is almost certainly ringed by forests, crawling with Slavic folklore nightmares. Rusalka lurking under frozen rivers. Domovoi that will protect you or curse you, depending on how you sweep the floor. Maybe a Leshy who treats lost first years as enrichment toys. Which, if you've been paying attention, means hardship isn't an exception at Koldovstoretz. It's the lesson plan. Detention isn't polishing trophies. It's hiking into the woods to negotiate with the temperamental forest spirit because you stole firewood from the wrong tree. The entire culture bakes in this idea that if the world tries to kill you, you adapt, you improvise, and you weaponize the weather right back. Now add politics. Russia went through Tsarist rule, the Soviet Union, and the chaotic post-Soviet era while this school quietly existed in the background. You really think the Mughal government didn't notice a training camp of weather-wielding, forest-commanding wizards? During the Soviet years, Koldovstoretz probably ended up under heavy state supervision, with talent scouted young and funneled into magical intelligence, border security, and we swear this is a meteorological research program units. Pattern interrupt for your brain. Imagine Durmstrang complaining that their reputation is too dark, and Koldovstoretz just staring at them from inside a blizzard. State control breeds resistance, and a school already built on improvisation is perfect for it. Secret dueling clubs become actual underground cells. Fieldwork in the forest doubles as courier runs for hidden wizard networks. After the fall of the Soviet Union, those habits don't just vanish. Some alumni almost certainly walked away, grabbed a patch of forest, and started very quiet, very illegal micro-schools that don't bother asking the International Confederation for recognition. Look, nobody was surprised that Mahoutokoro ended up with precision and Uagadou with elegance. Koldovstoretz is the chaos cousin at the reunion, the one who shows up late, covered in snow, with a magically animated pine tree carrying their luggage. And yeah, take a moment, because if the official Russian school is this wild, wait until we talk about the places that are too unhinged to make the recognized 11 list. We'll get to that later. So if the official version of Koldovstoretz already sounds unhinged, the unofficial version is worse. Because the forest doesn't care about ICW brochures. The forest has its own curriculum. Let's start with the staff that technically don't work there. You've got Rusalki in the rivers, Leshy in the woods, Domovoi in the dormitories, all treating the school like their part-time job. First years learn very fast that you do not promise a Rusalka anything you can't deliver. You do not step over a Leshy's boundary markers without asking, and you definitely don't order a Domovoi around like it's a house elf. Every harmless midnight dare ends up as a live lesson in bargains, boundaries, and magical consent. You break a deal with a Rusalka, you're dragged underwater until a prefect negotiates your release with a blood price and a very awkward apology. And while Hogwarts students are swapping chocolate frog cards, Koldovstoretz kids are swapping curses. This is a culture where every village has its own protection hex, every grandmother has a personal jinx, and every family keeps a little notebook of things we do not talk about with the ministry. Those grimoires end up at school. Suddenly you've got third years trading generational maledictions like contraband study notes. Someone's passing around a hex that curdles milk at 20 paces. Someone else brings an old counter curse that only works if you insult the caster's ancestors in perfect old church Slavonic. Look, nobody was surprised when the dueling club meetings started looking like small-scale Balkan wars. Now layer in state surveillance. Because if you're wondering what a magical KGB looks like, picture enchanted portraits that report conversations, quills that record suspicious phrasing, and owls that occasionally don't arrive because a bureaucrat in a gray robe wanted to read your love letter first. For decades, students didn't just study concealment charms for fun. They needed them. Secret study groups met under disillusionment, homework was written with reversible ink, and entire friend groups developed coded communication spells that turned political complaints into recipes. You're not gossiping about purges. You're apparently discussing beet soup. After the war, that paranoia didn't go away. It just pivoted. Koldovstoretz alumni, already experts in moving unseen through cursed forests and past nosy officials, ended up becoming very popular with the post-war black market. You need a cursed artifact smuggled from a ruined Durmstrang vault to a collector in Brazil. Call the Russian who can walk 3 days through blizzard wards without leaving footprints. The same kids who once dodged surveillance charms now specialize in slipping dark objects between continents, wrapped in layers of folk magic that Western aurors can't even identify, let alone unravel. And here's the uncomfortable part, which, if you've been paying attention, you probably saw coming. Koldovstoretz isn't the outlier, it's the warning label. Because if this is what a recognized school looks like, what does that say about the ones the ICW refuses to even list? The places where the shadow curriculum isn't a secret, it's the sales pitch. We'll get to that later, when we talk about the schools the wizarding world pretends don't exist at all. So let's start with the big joke. Nobody at the ICW finds funny. 11 schools. 11. For the entire wizarding world. If you're wondering how that's supposed to work, you're not alone. We're talking about a global population of witches and wizards across every continent, every culture, every magical tradition. And apparently they all politely queue up for the same tiny handful of boarding schools like it's the Tri-Wizard Cup sign-up sheet. Look, nobody was surprised that the ICW phrased it carefully. 11 large, long-established schools. That's lawyer talk. That's, we recognize these ones, and we're going to pretend the rest don't exist so we don't have to regulate them talk. Because if Durmstrang can get a stamp of approval while openly flirting with the dark arts and restricting Muggleborns, what exactly didn't make the cut? This is where the missing schools start to get interesting. Picture the underground academies, family fortresses in the mountains where dark arts aren't an elective, they're the family business. Generational blood purity clans running summer programs that are really extremist training camps, teaching kids how to curse, conceal, and disappear long before they learn basic counterspells. You think Grindelwald and Voldemort were the only ones who built fan clubs? Yeah. Take a moment. Then you've got the regional schools that refuse ICW oversight on principle, old coven colleges that predate European ministries by centuries, that looked at the idea of a standardized curriculum and said, no, actually, we're good. Places where wandless magic is normal, where transfiguration follows indigenous rules, where they don't bother with owls because their exams are binding magical oaths that mark your soul if you cheat. And under all of that, the networks built by people the Big 11 don't really want. Muggleborns in countries where being exposed means you disappear. Indigenous practitioners whose magic was stolen, renamed, and shipped off to places like Ilvermorny or Beauxbatons as exotic charms. Half-giants, werewolves, Vila blood kids who get quietly discouraged from applying. They don't stop existing. They build their own spaces. Basement classrooms in magical safe houses. Forest circles guarded by creatures the ministry calls dangerous. Traveling teachers who show up, stay 3 nights, and leave behind a whole library in a single enchanted stone, Now imagine how that plays with the official schools. You really think Hogwarts doesn't lose the occasional prodigy to an unregistered mentor who promises real power, no rules? Spell theft becomes a sport. Castelobruxo develops a rainforest protection charm, and 6 months later, a darker version shows up in an illegal camp run by potion poachers. Uagadou perfects a new form of dream magic, and suddenly, some extremist group is weaponizing it to recruit teenagers in their sleep. We'll get to that later, but for now, let's celebrate the worst-kept secret. Somewhere in Africa or Asia, there's a lost school whose alumni keep popping up in every major crisis, from Grindelwald's rise to the post-Voldemort fallout. And yet its name never appears on any parchment, any registry, any ICW speech. The question isn't whether it exists. It's why everyone with power is trying so hard not to say it out loud. So if the big mystery is who's hiding a whole school, the smaller, messier question is, who's being quietly kept out of the ones we already know about? Because the wizarding world loves to pretend it's a meritocracy, while its schools are basically sorting hats for global class and blood politics. Let's start with the obvious villain, Durmstrang. Canon flat out tells you they do not admit Muggleborns, which, if you've been paying attention, is just Voldemort's HR policy with extra fur coats. Durmstrang has this long, proud, totally not suspicious at all history of dark arts instruction, pureblood families, and traditional values, which is code for, if your grandparents can't be traced in a pureblood directory, don't bother packing. Karkaroff didn't invent that culture. He just wore it like cologne. Compare that to Hogwarts, which on paper is the chill cousin, mixed intake. Muggleborns, half-bloods, purebloods, even half-giants and werewolves if Dumbledore is in charge and feeling spicy. Ilvermorny looks even more open, North American reach, accepts Muggleborns, kids from the States, Canada, probably that one kid who apparated across the border by accident. Uagadou goes further and just says, dream recruitment. You literally get scouted in your sleep. No quills, no owls, no panicked parents waiting for a letter that never comes. But here's the problem. Those open schools still have unwritten rules. Who actually hears stories about Ilvermorny if their family is hiding magic in a trailer park or a reservation where wizards have been burned by colonial ministries before? Who can afford a wand, robes, and a transatlantic port key to Hogwarts, even if McGonagall would love to send you a letter? Class isn't written in any school charter, but it shows up in who ends up on the train. Regional prejudice just layers on top. In Britain, Muggle-born stigma is the big one, but ask Lupin how friendly people are to werewolves. In Eastern Europe, Durmstrang's culture makes dark, magic-curious kids feel safe, and Muggle-borns feel like walking targets. Some African communities might trust Uagadou and side-eye European schools that historically stole their spells. A half-giant might feel safer at Hogwarts post-Hagrid, while a Vila descendant might prefer Beauxbatons' polished, low-key elitist energy. After Voldemort's defeat, blood purity ideology got absolutely dragged in public. Nobody respectable is writing pro-Muggle-born ban pamphlets anymore. Ministries issue statements, schools add diversity language to their prospectuses, and pure-blood extremists pretend they were confused the whole time. Couldn't have happened to a nicer crowd of bigots. But in private, those pure-blood alumni networks at places like Durmstrang and some old European academies keep whispering. Legacy admissions, subtle snubs, concerns about certain families. The war ended. The group chats did not. Pattern interrupt for you. What happens when a school doesn't care about your blood at all, or your last name, or your vault balance? Only whether you survive the entrance exam. Imagine a fortress in the mountains or deep jungle where the application is literally, get here alive, pass the trials, don't die in the cursed maze. You make it through, you're in. You fail, you become a cautionary tale first years whisper about. That kind of school doesn't ask who your parents were. It asks if you can outrun what's hunting you in the dark. And if you're wondering which school that sounds suspiciously like, hold that thought. We'll get to that later when we start talking about initiation rites that make the Triwizard Tournament look like a school picnic. Colonial classrooms. How European magic hijacked the syllabus. If you've been paying attention, you've probably noticed something weird. No matter where you go in the wizarding world, the proper school day starts to look suspiciously like Hogwarts with a tan. Charms at 9, transfiguration after lunch, potions in a dungeon that violates at least 3 safety codes. Let's start with the core problem. At some point, the International Confederation of Wizards basically decided that the Hogwarts model was the default factory setting for magical education. Wand-based Latinish incantations, parchment essays about standard spell theory, all treated as if this was the natural way magic evolved everywhere. Spoiler, it wasn't. It's just the way Europe wrote the rulebook, then stapled it to everyone else's forehead. Ilvermorny is the friendliest looking example of this. On paper, it's this wholesome mashup. European founders, Native American magical influences, 4 houses named after fantastic creatures from local lore. Very inclusive, very brochure-ready. But if you're wondering which magic actually runs the timetable, it's the European stuff. Wand work, British-style subjects, OWL equivalent exams. Indigenous magic gets treated like elective seasoning. Cool story for the sorting ceremony, a few specialty lessons, but not the backbone of what's considered real magical theory. It's like saying, your culture is so beautiful. We put it in the school gift shop. Castelobruxo and Uagadou, though, do not play that game quietly. Castelobruxo in Brazil is built around environmental guardianship. Students literally help protect enchanted rainforests and magical creatures from poachers who want to strip mine them for potion ingredients. Uagadou, perched in the mountains of Africa, is famous for wandless magic and dream-based spell work. These are not side quests. They are entire philosophies of what magic even is. But because the ICW still wants everyone speaking the same academic language, both schools have to bolt on approved subjects and exam standards, just so their graduates don't get treated like they went to some back alley spell garage. That's where textbook imperialism slams in. Picture standardized spell books, all written in European languages, shipped out as the required curriculum. Defensive charms, but written for wand users only. Transfiguration theory that assumes your magic must be channeled through carved wood, not your hands, your breath, your dreams, or your ancestor rituals. Oral traditions get sidelined as informal. Non-wand techniques become alternative practices, which is academic code for, we'll ignore this on the exam. Look, nobody was surprised when the schools that already matched the Hogwarts template ended up looking the most respectable. So, how do some schools fight back? Not by filing complaints with the ICW. Those meetings are 90% beard and 10% subcommittee, but by playing a double game. The official timetable shows charms and potions. The inspection-ready textbooks sit on the shelves. And after dark, entire branches of magic come out that never make it into the paperwork. Hidden dueling forms, forbidden weather magic, ancestor pacts that would make a British examiner faint. And one school in particular takes that secret syllabus way too far. We'll get to that later when we talk about a campus that literally weaponizes its after-hours program. So if you thought secret after-hours dueling clubs were bad, let's start with the part where wizarding schools legally sign off on kids almost dying for house points and bragging rights. Hogwarts is not the outlier here. It's closer to the safety school. Remember the Triwizard Tournament? The friendly competition that came with a known body count was banned for centuries. And then everyone went, yeah, let's bring that back. What could possibly go wrong? They literally resurrected a tradition where the fine print is, students may be eaten, drowned, or set on fire. And when Cedric dies, the reaction from half the adults is basically, anyway, which school wins the cup? That's how normalized risk is in magical education. If you're wondering why Harry kept walking toward danger, it's because the curriculum told him that was extra credit. Now scale that mindset globally. Durmstrang shows up for Triwizard already comfortable with dark arts homework. You really think their local traditions are safer? Picture a brutal dueling gauntlet in some underground stone hall, where fourth years have to run a corridor of upperclassmen hexes, jinxes, and educational curses while professors take notes on form. You drop your wand, you fail. You cry, you fail harder. It's hazing with a grading rubric. Head to Castelobruxo in the Amazon, guarding magical rainforests and creatures. You just know they've got jungle trials, week-long survival excursions where students are encouraged to navigate cursed vines, territorial spirits, and potion poacher traps. No adult supervision, just a chaperone who occasionally appears as a capybara and yells at you for getting cursed. If you make it back with all your limbs, for now, let's celebrate. You've bonded with the land. Then there's Koldovstoretz, buried in Russian winters so harsh your Patronus needs a scarf. Imagine mandatory winter survival weeks. No castle, no beds, just enchanted tents and blizzards while you practice fire magic and warding spells against things that really like the taste of lost first years. It's sold as character building. It's actually state-approved frostbite. Mahoutokoro takes it literally to another level. They already fly to school, they live in a storm-battered island fortress, and their Quidditch is legendary. Now add sky tests. Aerial exams over open ocean where you're balancing spell work, broom control, and weather magic, while the Pacific is right there waiting. You fumble a charm, you don't just lose the match, you fall. And sure, they probably have rescue teams, but if you've been paying attention, the wizarding world loves to slap a safety net under a dragon pit and call it a day. Every region has a justification. It builds courage. It honors our ancestors. It prepares them for real threats. Translation: we've always done it this way, and nobody wants to be the headmaster who cancels the cool deadly thing. Look, nobody was surprised Hogwarts brought back Triwizard. They were just surprised it ended up summoning Voldemort. And somewhere in that list of 11, one of the least described schools is hiding a rite darker than all of this. Not a tournament, not a field trip, a magically binding oath, taken in blood and spellfire, that follows you to the grave if you ever betray its secrets. Which school is it? What does it demand, and who already broke it? Yeah. Take a moment. Because the fallout from that oath is still echoing through the wizarding world. And we're about to dig into it. Kiwi, if that oath felt intense, remember, some schools don't need blood magic to terrify you. The campus does that all by itself. These places are basically living, sulking roommates that hate you, your friends, and your course schedule. Let's start with the baseline. Hogwarts. The castle we all weirdly treat like a cozy childhood home, even though it tried to kill first years with a three-headed dog. You've got the Forbidden Forest, which, if you're wondering, is basically a magical OSHA violation. Acromantulas, centaurs with boundary issues, and trees that will absolutely eat you if you step off the path. Then inside, the moving staircases casually yeet you away from class, and the shifting rooms rearrange themselves so you're late to everything. But compared to what's coming, Hogwarts feels almost playful, like the castle's pulling pranks, not planning your funeral. Castelobruxo does not have that chill. The Brazilian school is wrapped in rainforest that's actually on the payroll. Vines move when you're not looking, snagging your robes if you sneak out after curfew. Moss-covered stone guardians lumber awake to test if you're worthy to pass. And if you're not, they don't just give you detention. They turn you around and dump you back at the start like a furious, magical airport security line. Pathways rearrange in the undergrowth, trapping intruders in looping trails of green. And if you're a misbehaving student, apparently the school lets the jungle teach you a lesson. Imagine being grounded by an ecosystem. Then you have Koldovstoretz, where the campus forest is less mischievous and more, we remember what you did last winter. These Russian woods remember every spell ever cast on them. Every hex, every charm, every bored third year blasting branches for fun. Which, if you've been paying attention, means centuries of magical trauma stored in bark and roots. Use dark magic out there and the trees react violently. Branches whip, roots trip, entire groves shift to box you in. Sometimes they lash out at careless teenagers who don't even realize they're stepping into a centuries-old grudge match. Mahoutokoro raises the stakes again by building a school on an actual active volcano. Because what's better than regular exam stress? Volcanic exam stress. The Japanese wizards have layered containment spells and wards over the caldera, keeping the magma in check while students study overhead. But when those wards falter during exam season, you get tremors in the middle of your transfiguration test, ash drifting through enchanted windows, and a very real question: did you fail because you miscast, or because the mountain almost exploded? Pattern interrupt. because monsters and lava are at least obvious. The scariest campus might be the quiet one, the school where the corridors are calm, the grounds are peaceful, and the magic only activates when you try to leave. Memories blurred, friendships smudged. 4 years, 7 years, gone soft around the edges. You step outside the wards and suddenly can't remember half the spells you learned or the secrets you swore you'd never tell. We'll get to that later, because first we need to talk about who would build a school that doesn't just keep you safe inside. It keeps the truth locked in with you. Oaths that don't just fade when you toss your school scarf in a drawer. Contracts that sit in your bloodstream like Horcrux glitter. That's what we're talking about now. Let's start with the gold standard for do not break this. The unbreakable vow. You watch Snape clasp hands with Narcissa, watch that weird smoky ligature wrap around them, and you knew this was not a pinky promise. Break it. You die. Instantly. No appeal, no ministry paperwork, just magical cardiac arrest. Now imagine taking that level of seriousness and scaling it up from one desperate mother to an entire institution with a legal department and a crest. If you're wondering which schools would absolutely abuse that, look at the Guardians. Castelobruxo sits in the middle of a magically protected rainforest, crawling with creatures smugglers would sell their wands for. You really think they just hand out maps and say, "Don't share"? No. You sign, you swear, you drink some glowing infusion made from local plants, and suddenly your tongue blisters if you describe the wards around a certain pyramid or the exact location of that one river that eats boats and memories. Uagadou goes even harder, because it's not just geography, it's knowledge. Cloud summoning techniques, stone-shaping rites, star-based divination methods that make Western astrology look like a BuzzFeed quiz. Graduates walk out with a literal sky-level NDA. Betray those secrets, and maybe your prophetic dreams turn on you. You start seeing your own failures, your own death, every time you close your eyes. Self-haunting as a disciplinary measure? Yeah. Take a moment. Then you've got Durmstrang, the school that heard bad reputation and said, branding opportunity. Officially, they're all about discipline and magical rigor. Unofficially, student factions absolutely end up doing little blood oaths in the boathouse at midnight. Informal, half-legal, totally dark. Swear loyalty to a future warlord, bind your magic to a symbol, promise you'll answer when called. The school keeps pretending it's neutral while its alumni network is basically a subscription service for extremist causes. And this doesn't just stay at school. Ministries know. Dark organizations know. A Castelobruxo graduate who physically can't reveal rainforest wards? Perfect hire for international conservation task forces. Slightly suspicious for any job that requires full disclosure. A Durmstrang alum with a hazy old oath scar on their wrist? The Auror office clocks that instantly. Meanwhile, some underground cabal looks at that same scar and goes, pre-vetted, loyal, excellent. Your teenage signature quietly edits your entire CV. So, picture this during a global magical crisis. A Hogwarts cursebreaker, bound by some post-war pledge to protect British magical infrastructure. An Ilvermorny curse worker, locked into a founding charm about never endangering North American nomad secrecy, and a Uagadou seer, oath-bound not to reveal certain visions that involve sacred sites. They're in the same room, they need to share intel, and the magic in their veins literally will not let them cooperate. Who breaks first? Who dies if they try? We'll get to that later, when those oaths start clashing on a scale nobody planned for. So while those oath-bound adults are busy not sharing life-saving intel, something else happens. News breaks. Hogwarts has just survived a full-scale siege, Voldemort is dead, and the Battle of Hogwarts races across the wizarding world faster than a first year on a broom for the very first time. One school's apocalypse instantly becomes everyone's cautionary tale. Let's start with the vibe shift. At Mahoutokoro, kids who used to whisper about Quidditch stats are suddenly whispering about unforgivable curses in corridors lined with enchanted stormcloud windows. At Castelobruxo, Guardians of the Rainforest are asking if a British snake man can infiltrate a castle. What stops poachers backed by dark wizards from doing the same to their wards? Uagadou students, who literally write spells in the sky, are staring up and wondering what happens when someone like Voldemort learns to weaponize that scale of magic. Look, nobody was surprised when Hogwarts admitted its security was a disaster. Possessed teachers, cursed jobs, a basilisk in the plumbing. The audit writes itself. After the war, every headmaster and headmistress quietly runs their own "Please Merlin, don't let us be next" review. Wards get layered, then doubled, then tied into international alert charms. Durmstrang, already paranoid, starts background checking staff so hard even the portraits are filling out forms. Ilvermorny, sitting on that sacred mountain, adds no mage incursion alarms, dark arts residue detectors, and emergency portkey routes coordinated with MACUSA. If you're wondering whether they start talking to each other more, yeah. Take a moment. The same confederation that only recognizes 11 schools suddenly realizes it needs a group chat, secure flu channels between head offices. Patronus call protocols for "we just spotted a masked army on the horizon" situations. Secret annexes in the Triwizard Tournament paperwork that are basically, if anyone tries to resurrect a Dark Lord during a school event, you tell everyone this time, and then the classrooms change. Recent magical history stops being Grindelwald, but make it vague, and becomes the Second Wizarding War, how Hogwarts almost fell apart. Entire modules on terrorism, resistance cells, propaganda, and how not to ignore the kid who says the Dark Lord is back. Harry's story ends up on syllabi worldwide, half warning, half rallying cry. Teachers at Beauxbatons point to him when they talk about moral courage. Teachers at Koldovstoretz point to him when they talk about what happens when adults refuse to listen for an entire year. Inside the student body, it gets messy. Every school suddenly has Dumbledore discourse. Was he a manipulative chess master, or the only one playing the game at all? Snape becomes a case study in ethics at Durmstrang. Hero, villain, or weaponized trauma in greasy hair. Kids argue about what resistance should look like if a new Dark Lord rises in, say, South America or East Asia. Is it sabotage? Open battle? Leaking documents to the Quibbler's local equivalent? And here's the twist. While adults build stronger wards and tighter rules, some schools quietly go too far. Hallways bristle with detection spells. Friend groups fracture over loyalty oaths. Magical burnout skyrockets as teenagers are told every single day that they are the last line between civilization and annihilation. In trying so hard to make sure nobody ever becomes the next Voldemort, they start creating a different kind of extremist entirely. One born not from blood purity, but from surveillance, exhaustion, and the terrifying urge to burn the whole system down. One of the 11 is about to learn that the hard way. And if you're wondering which school learns this lesson in the loudest, messiest way possible, it's not Hogwarts. It's the one that's been flirting with the dark arts in plain sight for centuries. Let's start with the kids, who trained for a war that ended without them. You've got entire year groups at Durmstrang, Koldovstoretz, even Mahoutokoro, who grew up in the Voldemort era, hearing that the next Grindelwald could pop up any second. They drilled dueling forms instead of learning proper arithmancy, practiced shield charms in the courtyard, and wrote essays about acceptable collateral damage in hypothetical conflicts. Then the Dark Lord dies, the headlines move on, and they graduate with elite combat magic and absolutely no idea what to do with it. Some join Auror forces, some become curse breakers, and some look around at the corrupt ministries, the secretive international confederation, the way muggles keep accidentally inventing nukes and climate collapse, and they go, wait, we're just not using this power? That's where the ideological splinters start. You get one faction that thinks Voldemort had a point about secrecy and magical superiority, but that genocide was bad for PR. These are the soft mask supremacists. Keep the statute of secrecy. Keep wizard control. Just stop carving racial slurs into people. Then you get the exact opposite. Radical exposure groups who believe hiding magic is the real crime. They want to reveal everything to muggles, not to coexist. But because they're convinced shared knowledge is the only way to stop another Dark Lord from rising in the shadows. And because this is the wizarding world, these people don't just form random clubs. They form school-based cells. Durmstrang hardliners meet in old boathouses, trading restricted curses their grandfathers used under Grindelwald. Ilvermorny radicals, raised on stories of no-maj persecution and American civil rights, push for magical integration so hard they start planning coordinated reveal days in major cities. Koldovstoretz anarchists, used to a school that literally relocates itself through the Russian forests, start experimenting with moving safe houses, roving protest camps, and sabotage spells keyed to international port keys. Look, nobody was surprised that recruitment starts with nostalgia. It's all, remember our old dorm? Remember when the bludger broke through the window? Remember when the headmaster accidentally locked us in the forbidden wing? Shared trauma, shared jokes, shared songs from the school feast? Old housemates invite each other to reunions that are actually strategy meetings. Former Quidditch captains become field commanders. The kid who ran the illegal potion ring? Logistics? Pattern interrupt. While all of that is brewing, Hogwarts is knitting, literally and metaphorically. Inside the rebuilt walls, McGonagall is quietly turning the castle into a pressure valve instead of a pressure cooker. Conflict mediation circles in the Great Hall. Joint projects with Muggle-born parents. A defense curriculum that teaches how to disarm extremists, not just duel them. It's not perfect, it's not flashy, and it definitely doesn't trend on the front page of the Daily Prophet, but that's the split the 11 schools are facing. Weaponized nostalgia versus reimagined tradition, and one of them is about to push that choice to the absolute breaking point. So let's go back to the crime scene. Hogwarts, the school that statistically should have been shut down by every safety board in the wizarding world, decides to come back from a literal war and reopen for classes. Because of course it does. Let's start with the bricks and bloodstains, the towers get rebuilt, the Great Hall ceiling is recharmed, the staircases are, slightly less homicidal, but not everything is polished away. Whole sections of walls stay cracked and scorched. A corridor near the entrance hall still bears a giant spider burn from the last stand against Acromantulas, and the courtyard stones where Fred fell are left uneven, like the castle itself refuses to pretend it forgot. New memorials appear. Names carved into the stone by the lake, a quiet plaque in the Room of Requirements ruins, a tapestry that shows DA members casting patronuses instead of house elves carrying food. But the real rebuilding job? It's inside the kids' heads. You cannot have a generation that watched their classmates die in the Great Hall and then just say, "Cool, back to Transfiguration, don't forget your homework." So, apparently, Hogwarts finally gets what every real school has had for decades: counselors. Actual mind healers from St. Mungo's start holding weekly sessions. There are support circles for Battle of Hogwarts survivors, meetings for kids who lost parents, and quiet rooms that are not detention, for once. If you're wondering who stands at the front of those meetings about fear and courage, yeah. Take a moment. It's Neville. Neville, war hero, trauma survivor, and now herbology professor, ends up co-teaching new classes on ethical magic and resistance. They talk about what happens when loyalty curdles into fanaticism, when for the greater good becomes a murder excuse, when you follow orders instead of your conscience. It's messy, and students cry, and nobody gets house points for it. The curriculum itself gets a hard reset. Cursed objects in classrooms? Gone. No more possessed diaries just chilling in a girl's bathroom. McGonagall signs off on Defense Against the Dark Arts vetting that is actually background checks, not mysterious stranger with a skull collection, seems fine. With the curse broken, you finally get long-term data professors who can build a sane syllabus about recognizing grooming tactics and extremist recruitment, not just, here's how to throw a cool red spell. Muggle Studies expands from, this is a plug, to deep dives into Muggle history, propaganda, and how dehumanization starts with jokes and ends with graveyards. And Hogwarts doesn't keep this to itself. After the war, the castle becomes the unofficial group therapy center for the 11 big schools. Beauxbatons sends staff for conferences on infiltration. Durmstrang quietly dispatches observers to sessions on radicalization. Uagadou shares techniques for non-wand defensive magic when your school gets occupied. They trade case studies on secret police, cursed contracts, and what to do when your headmaster is compromised. For now, let's celebrate that Hogwarts leans into healing. But if you've been paying attention, you know some schools are looking at this whole therapy and memorials thing and rolling their eyes. They're not rebuilding, they're rearming, and they're betting the next war will be fought on their terms. And if Hogwarts is the school trying to heal, Ilvermorny is the school trying not to get doxxed. Let's start with the nightmare nobody at the International Confederation really planned for. The age of the smartphone. Hogwarts had Rita Skeeter and a haunted camera. Ilvermorny has 4K video, facial recognition, and a million no-maj teens who think mysterious lightning over a mountain is perfect TikTok content. You can obliviate one nosy neighbor. You cannot obliviate the entire internet, because North America is basically a surveillance buffet. Satellites, drones, traffic cams, weather apps that keep asking why a random hill in Massachusetts keeps spawning localized thunderstorms every September. If you're wondering why Ilvermorny looks extra boring from the outside, that's on purpose. MACUSA has layered the place in illusions, anti-drone charms, and what is essentially magical geo-fencing, so Google Maps just gives up. So MACUSA, already paranoid after Grindelwald, looks at the post-war world and cranks everything to 11. Stricter rules on student contact with no-mods, curfews for leaving campus. Exchange programs quietly postponed because one accidental Lumos on Instagram Live and the statute of secrecy faceplants. They even deploy enchanted devices around the grounds that jam electronics. Phones die, cameras glitch, live streams buffer forever. Somewhere, a sixth year is screaming at 3 bars of service that are actually just well-disguised wards. Look, nobody was surprised when the rules got harsher, but Ilvermorny teens are still Ilvermorny teens. You tell a 16-year-old they cannot film, cannot post, cannot even text a no-maj friend about their weird boarding school in the woods, and congratulations, you've just invented the most tempting challenge on the continent. Kids are sneaking in contraband phones wrapped in anti-detection charms, starting anonymous accounts that totally aren't real magic guys. It's editing, and trying to go viral with floating pencils and self-stirring coffee. And because this is America, imported fear hits different. The no-maj world is obsessed with terrorism, school shootings, lockdown drills. Ilvermorny absorbs all that energy without anyone saying it out loud. The wards get thicker, the patrols get heavier, and suddenly the castle feels less like a school and more like a magically armored bunker pretending to be a picturesque historical site. You've got security drills that look suspiciously like aura training, shield charms keyed to mass casualty scenarios, and professors who flinch every time fireworks go off in the distance. Which, if you've been paying attention, means the threat isn't a Dark Lord with a brand. It's exposure. It's some scared no-maj parent catching a glitchy video of their kid's class trip near that weird mountain, sending it to the news, and unleashing a continent-wide panic about a secret cult school in the sky. Yeah. Take a moment. Because while Ilvermorny is wrestling with Twitter, TikTok, and trigger-happy governments, Uagadou's students are staring at a different kind of feed entirely. Not timelines, not trending tags. The stars. And lately, those have started screaming about something much, much bigger than cameras. So let's start with the uncomfortable part. In this era, the new Dark Lord isn't a snake-faced guy with a diary kink. It's the climate. Slow, human-made, and somehow more stubborn than a pureblood on a Wizengamot subcommittee. If you're wondering what that looks like in the wizarding world, picture dark magic that doesn't come from a wand, deforestation that eats through protective wards, droughts that make potion ingredients wither, ecosystems collapsing so fast that even time-turners are like, yeah, no, I'm not touching that paradox. You can't just yell finite at a dying rainforest. The curse is centuries of bad decisions, and nobody taught a counterspell for that in defense against the dark arts. Castelobruxo ends up on the absolute front lines. This is the school that literally guards huge stretches of magical rainforest, which, if you've been paying attention, also means it's standing between rare creatures and every shady wand for hire with a cauldron to fill. As Muggle protections weaken and governments get bought out, poachers don't just sneak in for a few scales anymore. Corporations roll up with enchanted bulldozers, cursed chainsaws, and lawyers. Lots of lawyers. So the school has to drop the whole mysterious hidden temple vibe and go into open conflict. You've got teenage witches hexing illegal logging camps, professors casting continent-wide Confundus fields on satellite drones, and groundskeepers running guerrilla warfare with animated vines. It's less field trip, more unsanctioned horror mission with extra homework. Meanwhile, Uagadou is watching the sky crack. Astronomy and divination classes start charting constellations that don't behave. Stars dimming early. Planets shifting in ways that no arithmancy chart predicted. Meteor showers that arrive like clockwork every time a major magical species goes locally extinct. Yeah, take a moment. Prophecies that used to be about dark wizards and chosen ones quietly pivot into something way worse. Timelines where dragons vanish, where phoenixes stop rebirthing, where the magical winds over entire regions just die. Uagadou seers write warnings that read less like mystic poetry and more like climate reports with extra doom. And apparently, every time a government signs off on another disastrous project, the omens spike. That's where interschool alliances start to matter. Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, Castelobruxo, Uagadou, all comparing notes in very awkward staff meetings. Weather-stabilizing charms from Scottish storm wards get tested over the Amazon. Beauxbatons alchemists share barrier spells to shield coral reefs and kelpie nesting grounds. Uagadou illusionists teach mass disguise magic so endangered creatures can hide in plain sight from Muggle tech. And pattern interrupt? While some schools are literally holding back rising tides and sky-level omens, others are still arguing about whose alumni get the best ministry jobs. Look, nobody was surprised. The same people who ignored Voldemort until he knocked on their front door are now sending thoughts and prayers to melting ice caps. We'll get to that later, because the next school takes the idea of dangerous tradition and cranks it straight past questionable into sheer, are you actually trying to die? Durmstrang is what happens when you build a school on a ley line of unresolved trauma, and then act confused when everything explodes. Because in Eastern Europe, kids don't just inherit grandma's recipe book. They inherit Grindelwald, Voldemort, Soviet occupation, collapsing regimes, border changes, and about 6 different wars their history of magic teacher doesn't officially cover. You walk into class and the walls are already arguing. One portrait remembers cheering for Grindelwald. Another remembers hiding from Muggle tanks. Your roommate's grandfather served in some secret wizard militia, which, if you've been paying attention, usually means did war crimes and never talked about it. The result is this dense, sticky web of mistrust, where every alliance feels temporary, every promise sounds like propaganda, and every student learns one core lesson: power always lies. Let's start with Durmstrang's identity crisis. After the war, the school tried a full rebrand. New crest, slightly less murdery curriculum, a brochure that definitely does not mention dark arts proficiency on page 1. Officially, they pivoted from "we study the dark arts" to "we study the history of dark arts to prevent them." Cute. Except a lot of their star alumni, still sitting in ministries from the Baltic to the Balkans, still controlling ports, customs offices, and those very fun, magical security agencies that answer to exactly no one. So you get this split personality. The headmaster is giving speeches about ethics and accountability, while the guest lecturer next week is an ex-Grindelwald supporter who regrets his youthful choices, but also owns half the broom factories in Eastern Europe. Students know the truth. Durmstrang's network runs deep into underground dueling rings, cursed artifact auctions, and private mercenary spellcasters who show up in conflicts where Muggles only see mysterious accidents. Yeah. Take a moment. Then you've got Koldovstoretz, the quieter cousin that looks harmless until you read the footnotes. This is the school that lived under Muggle dictatorships, secret police, and censorship so thick you needed a password just to complain. Some of its teachers grew up dodging both magical and Muggle surveillance, and they never forgot it. If you're wondering what they teach now, it's not just charms and transfiguration, it's pattern recognition. A defense professor casually assigns essays on early warning signs of authoritarian capture. A history teacher walks students through how propaganda works, both magical and non-magical, and then asks, "So, recognize any of this in our current minister's speeches?" For now, let's celebrate the fact that someone in the wizarding world is teaching kids to side-eye every smiling politician, no matter what flag they wave. Together, Durmstrang and Koldovstoretz sit right on top of cross-border dark markets. Old battlefields and broken borders make perfect cover. Cursed heirlooms from fallen pureblood houses. Soviet-era experimental potions that were absolutely not legal even then. Smuggled basilisk venom. Unregistered animagus mercenaries who sell their services to whoever pays in dragon gold. A lot of that traffic flows through alumni networks, cultural exchanges, and conveniently timed Quidditch tournaments. And in the middle of all this, Hogwarts legacy kids like Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy are stepping into a world where every school already has a file on them. Durmstrang sees potential muscle. Koldovstoretz sees test cases for their resistance curriculum. Other schools we haven't even talked about yet are watching too, because the new generation of British heroes is walking into a global arena where nobody is neutral, every institution has an agenda, and Hogwarts is just one player on a very crowded, very haunted board. We'll get to that later, when one particular school decides to stop watching and start recruiting. So what does that actually look like on the ground? Not ministers, not headmasters, kids. 11-year-olds opening a window and getting not one owl, but 3, each from a different castle that survived a different war. Let's start with legacy pressure, because the letters don't just say, "Congratulations." They say, "We know who your parents are." Imagine the child of a Death Eater who fled to Durmstrang, a war hero who fought at Hogwarts, and a Brazilian healer who trained at Castelobruxo. That kid gets Hogwarts promising safety, Durmstrang promising power, and Castelobruxo quietly offering redemption in the rainforest. Yeah. Take a moment. You've got Teddy Lupin, famous orphan, metamorph magus, walking reminder of sacrifice. If you're wondering whether Hogwarts is his only option, it's not. Ilvermorny would absolutely love the PR of British War baby chooses fresh start in America. Uagadou, which, if you've been paying attention, has a reputation for world-class self-transfiguration, might send a very polite, very pointed letter about honoring his talents somewhere less haunted. And these kids aren't growing up in isolated bubbles anymore. Interschool friendships are suddenly a thing adults can't control. Picture a pen pal program cooked up by some idealistic deputy headmistress, where a Beauxbatons second year is trading gossip with a Mahoutokoro chaser and a Hogwarts muggle-born who still flinches at the word war. Quidditch exchanges become the new Tri-Wizard tournament, except with fewer corpses and more awkward crushes in the stands. Summer institutes pop up in neutral locations, sponsored by the International Confederation of Wizards, all very, "For now, let's celebrate unity," on the brochure. In reality, you've got Ilvermorny and Uagadou students comparing wandless charms, Castelobruxo kids side-eyeing anyone who jokes about exotic ingredients, and Hogwarts students realizing their castle is not the center of the universe. Uncomfortable? Yes. Necessary? Also yes. Then you have identity confusion dialed up to 11. A British-Brazilian kid whose gran fled Voldemort but whose other side of the family guards Amazonian magical sites. A French-African witch with one parent from Beauxbatons royalty, and another from a tiny, unrecognized African school that the ICW pretends doesn't exist. A Japanese-American boy with Mahoutokoro robes waiting in Tokyo, and Ilvermorny alumni parents in Boston arguing about where feels safer. Where do you belong when every choice feels like betraying half your history? Careers keep the pressure cooking, because your alma mater still quietly decides which ministry office will take your application seriously. Hogwarts and Beauxbatons dominate old European bureaucracies. Ilvermorny pipelines you into international law and magical tech. Uagadou graduates run half the global charm innovation scene while pretending not to notice. Look, nobody was surprised when pure-blood families started treating school choice like stock portfolios, trading influence across continents. So you get a generation told the war is over, while every form, every interview, every social circle still asks, "Where did you study?" The castles may be far apart, but the shadow is shared. And that's the real question hanging over all 11 schools. Did the wizarding world actually learn anything from Voldemort and Grindelwald? Or did it just upgrade its disasters with better branding and international exchange programs? We'll get to that later, when one school decides to prove exactly how little has changed. No, so let's start with the big plot twist of this entire series. The 11 schools are not cute background flavor for your sorting hat quiz. They are the wizarding world's factories for justice and for hypocrisy. At the same time, which, if you've been paying attention, has kind of been the vibe since McGonagall sent 11-year-olds into a murder forest for detention. Every school has a mission statement that sounds noble. Hogwarts talks about bravery and loyalty. Beauxbatons sells elegance and culture. Ilvermorny is like, we're all about inclusivity and the American dream. Please ignore the Puritan ghost in the corner. But under that branding, you've got blood prejudice baked into admissions, colonial syllabi that treat African and indigenous magic like exotic electives, and traditions that literally kill students if they slip during a broom race. Durmstrang teaches discipline and martial skill, while quietly gatekeeping Muggleborns and flirting with dark arts like it's an extracurricular. And here's the messed up miracle. These same places that normalize cursed corridors and institutional bias keep spitting out the people who break their rules. Hogwarts raises Neville Longbottom, professional disaster child, who ends up leading a student army and chopping the head off a Horcrux snake that the curriculum never even mentioned. Beauxbatons sends Fleur Delacour into the Tri-Wizard tournament as the pretty one, and she walks out a war hero who refuses to abandon Bill after he's mauled by a werewolf. Durmstrang gives us Victor Crumb, international Quidditch celebrity, who is supposed to be the poster boy for edgy Eastern European magic, and instead publicly turns his back on Grindelwald's symbol. If you're wondering what all 11 schools really teach, it's not charms, it's survival. Hogwarts turns into an occupied fortress and still trains kids to fight in a war the adults lost twice. Castelobruxo throws you into protected Amazonian jungles where poachers and dark alchemists treat your campus like a hunting ground. Mahoutokoro literally hangs your morality on your back. Your robes darken with every illegal spell you try, and one bad decision can get you expelled, disgraced, or recruited by someone who likes their soldiers desperate. After Voldemort, the test changes, but it doesn't get easier. Open terror gives way to quiet structural violence, surveillance charms justified as security, climate collapse hammering schools built into mountains, rainforests, and oceans, extremist cells hiding in alumni networks and heritage clubs. Kingsley and later Hermione can reform ministries all day. If the schools don't adapt, the next Dark Lord won't need a snake face. They'll have a board of governors and a PR team. Yeah. Take a moment, because once you see the schools this way, Harry's story actually looks smaller and way more miraculous. One castle, one war, one traumatized kid who somehow walks out choosing mercy over power in a system that trained him to do the opposite. Understanding the dark lore doesn't ruin the magic. It stretches it, makes the wizarding world bigger, messier, and uncomfortably real. And it raises one final question. What happens when one of these schools stops pretending and openly leans into the darkness it's been flirting with for centuries? So what happens when a school finally stops pretending? Weirdly, with Hogwarts, the answer is, you send your kids back there anyway. Let's start with that epilogue. Platform 9 3/4. Steam, Owls, and Albus Severus Potter panicking about Slytherin while his dad, who once died in a forest and came back, is like, mate, it's fine. You're watching Harry, Ginny, Ron, and Hermione do the most shockingly normal thing in the wizarding world, putting their children on the exact train that almost delivered Harry to a basilisk, a werewolf, and a genocidal snake man in a suit. Look, nobody was surprised that Hogwarts reopened. McGonagall was never going to let a little thing like a full-scale battle, a collapsed bridge, and lingering dark magic stop her from running her school. But after everything we've talked about, cursed classrooms, lethal sports, a forest that is basically a magical OSHA violation, it's kind of wild that the dream is still go back to school, but safer this time. Because that's the fantasy, right? Not a world without trauma, but a world where you get to rebuild the place that hurt you and hand it to your kids upgraded. Harry isn't trying to burn Hogwarts down. He's trying to give James and Albus the version he never had. No possessed professors, no secret Tom Riddle diary, a defense against the dark arts teacher who sticks around long enough to set homework. And the universe, for once, actually cooperates. Dolores Umbridge, exposed, tried, and locked up for crimes against Muggleborns. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Voldemort? Soul shredded, stuck in eternal limbo, no redemption arc, No surprise comeback tour. The Death Eaters who survived, scattered, imprisoned, or living as disgraced has-beens while Kingsley and later Hermione dragged the Ministry into something resembling adulthood, which, if you've been paying attention, is a very specific kind of justice. Neat, satisfying, almost suspiciously tidy, compared to what we see when we zoom out to the global schools. Hogwarts gets a memorial and a curriculum update. Durmstrang still quietly gatekeeps blood status. Castelobruxo is fending off poachers. Uagadou is juggling colonial fallout and talent poaching. The British school cleans its house, while the rest of wizarding education is still living in systemic chaos. And yet, if you're wondering why fans are still weirdly proud of these places, it's because they try. They fail spectacularly. They cover things up. They literally endanger children as an extracurricular, but they also change. McGonagall modernizes Hogwarts. Ilvermorny rethinks its house culture. Even the International Confederation stops pretending only 11 schools exist is anything but a PR move. For now, let's celebrate the domestic chaos. The Weasleys arguing over sandwiches. Harry losing track of which kid's trunk has the sneakoscope. Hermione drafting educational reform while reminding Rose to pack her books. If this is what the schools are hiding, imagine the ministries that fund them, the Azkabans that back them up, the departments of mysteries that study their worst mistakes. Yeah. Take a moment, because that's where we're going next. Yeah, take a moment. Because now your owl is literally at the window, and the wizarding world is asking you the only question that matters. Where are you actually enrolling? Let's start with you in the sorting chair, but global edition. Knowing everything you know now, which school are you actually saying yes to? And which one are you absolutely refusing even with a full scholarship, a free wand, and lifetime chocolate frog points? Are you brave enough to rock Mahoutokoro's color-shifting, snitch-you-out robes that broadcast your dark arts grades to the entire student body? Or are you like, no thanks, I don't need my fashion choices to be a criminal record? Castelobruxo kids are out here taking field trips into cursed rainforests, dodging poachers, and doing magical conservation while you're still figuring out which end of your wand sparks. Be honest, are you signing up for that? Or are you putting that brochure straight in the bin with Durmstrang's "We Swear We've Changed" pamphlet? Because if you've been paying attention, any school that casually bans Muggleborns and treats dark arts like a fun elective is not just a red flag. It's the whole red Quidditch pitch. And then you've got Uagadou sending acceptance letters directly into your dreams like a cosmic push notification. Imagine being 12, minding your own business, and the night sky just updates your life plans. Are you in love with that, or completely terrified that the school can literally slide into your subconscious whenever it wants? Tell me in the comments, your first choice, your hard no, and your chaotic backup option when Hogwarts regrets to inform you. But don't stop at the official 11. The International Confederation only recognizes the big, shiny institutions, which, if you've been paying attention, means there are way more schools operating in the shadows. So, which regions do you think deserve their own canon schools? A desert academy that weaponizes sandstorms? A floating city school that only appears at certain tides? A hidden institution built by colonized witches and wizards who took back their stolen magic and locked away the spells the ministries were too scared to admit they'd taken? Drop your headcanons, your cursed mascots, your unhinged initiation rites. For now, let's celebrate how unhinged wizard education can get when fandom takes the wheel. And if you're wondering where we're apparating next, we're not done. We're going into the ministries that fund these disasters. We're talking post-war reforms, the new Azkaban without Dementors, and what actually crawled into that prison after they left. We're breaking down which heroes would crash and burn or secretly thrive if you dropped them into Durmstrang, Ilvermorny, or Uagadou for a year abroad. Harry at Castelobruxo, Hermione at Mahoutokoro, Ron at literally the worst possible place, because comedy. So before your acceptance letter gets rerouted to Durmstrang by accident, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Tell the algorithm you survived this orientation. Your owl is waiting, your school is watching, and class, unfortunately, is just getting started.